Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you're watching second and final part of What If Naruto Failed to Save Issei. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time, let's start the story.
Shadows started to dance across the upper wall, and the dimly lit room started to lighten. The open curtain, which let light into the room, made the change obvious. The tiny specks of light danced across his dreamless eyes, which had spent the entire night staring into nothing, as they stretched across his floor and onto his bed. They didn't even move when the sun began its morning ritual of infiltrating his eyes, which would have eventually woken him up. His body, too, had been dormant for some time. He had laid in bed, playing with his goggles lightly in his hand as if he had expected them to do something, ever since he had come home and undressed down to his boxers. Perhaps it served as a reminder to him of the situation's reality. It served as a reminder that, contrary to what he had hoped, he was not living in a fantasy. By now, a typical dream would have come to an end. There didn't seem to be a way out of this nightmare. Looking back, he saw that the easy part of coping seemed to be telling his friend's body all those things he would do at that precise moment. Apparently, the easiest part had been accepting your friend's death. It had always been said that accepting such a thing was more difficult. Even after witnessing them murder his friend, he found the part that followed acceptance to be even more horrific. Living with what transpired caused you to reflect. It got you thinking about what might have happened if you had taken a different action. It made you wonder if he might have chosen a different path to reach Rainier, or if he ought to have refrained from attacking his captor out of rage in the first place. The fallen angel's expression made it very evident that her actions in front of him were an insult to his disobedience. To demonstrate to him that he could not have saved Issei no matter how hard he tried. What might have happened if he hadn't gotten into that van with her and Issei was the most obvious difference he considered. What would have happened if he had given in to his paranoia? Issei probably wouldn't have died if they hadn't been there, according to a large part of him. Possibly a guilty conscience, but he was aware of the truth. Issei would still have died and she would have come for him even if he hadn't gone. He wouldn't have been ready at all. He would have perished. So was there anything else he could have done, otherwise? Sincerely, he had no idea, and rationally, he knew he had done everything he could, but the feeling persisted. It was simply demonstrated by the hole in his heart. The worst part was that he knew he would never be able to tell anyone the truth about what really happened to Issei. If he tried, who would believe him? When he claimed that a fallen angel had taken his friend's soul and that a weapon had emerged from it that chose him as his new partner, who would genuinely believe him? He could show them, of course, but what on earth would happen to him? What would happen to him if he told the world about it? It seemed like this was a secret that people had gone to considerable measures to keep hidden. He wouldn't be eager to find out what happened to the last person, and he couldn't have been the first to try to reveal the truth. The harsh sounding voice in his head asked, "So how long are you going to lay there?" reminding him of something else he had discovered this evening. He was not schizophrenic. Contrary to what he, his parents, and the doctors had believed, those voices in his head were more than hallucinations. Evidently, they were more than just aspects of his own imagination. They were living, breathing beings with their own personalities. That theory was fully supported by him using his magic. He had initially believed that his mind had constructed them as a subconscious regulatory system to manage the different focal points of his power when he first considered them in their relationship to magic. At first, it had made sense, particularly after they had assisted him in removing the subconscious barriers preventing him from using magic. His emotions and, consequently, his magic would have been restrained by the presence of the diverse personalities. Unfortunately for him, the theory ended up falling flat on its face when he discovered that there were actually other souls connected to his own, much like the connection Diedrich had established when linking boosted gear to his soul. It seemed logical that the mind would create personalities in order to control power. It was physically impossible for the mind to create 9 seemingly distinct souls in order to control power, especially since, if he had to guess, the human mind was unable to even comprehend the creation of a soul. Therefore, he had to try it again after discarding that theory. Based on what Rainier and Diedrich had said, it made the most sense to conclude that they were also sacred gears. It was logical. That would have made a lot of sense, given that she claimed to be planning to extract them, especially if they could all be called forth as weapons like shukaku. Until Diedrich once more chose to interrupt his train of thought and let him know that there were very few and rare sacred gears with sentience. With that pointed out, the new partner of the Red Welsh felt like banging his head up against the wall. Sentient sacred gears were a rare breed, and statistically speaking, having 9 sentient gears would be nearly impossible. In fact, having this many gears in one person's body naturally was probably unheard of before, so he was left stuck once more without a solution. Although he was deeply saddened by his friend's passing, he was also unsure of how to handle the voices in general, so he hadn't even spoken to Diedrich or the voices since he got home. What should he have said to them? He had heard them since he was 9 years old. He could practically recall their first conversation with him, in which they repeatedly called his name and asked him questions about things he was unable to recall or knew nothing about. He still remembered asking his parents if it was normal to hear voices. They had just given him a look, and the boy at the time gave a sincere response when asked what they thought. After all, how was he supposed to know that it wasn't normal? He didn't realize it was actually an abnormality until they took him to see a psychiatrist. At the time, he was terrified of what would happen to him. Making friends had been challenging enough because of his appearance, but now he had to put up with constant chatter from voices in his head. For weeks, he had been tense, especially after they began forcing him to take drugs to help with the issue. He also believed that they had been working for a while. He didn't hear the voices in his head for another 4 years. If hanging out with your pervert best friend who gradually sank deeper into eroticism could be regarded as normal, then he had been able to continue as usual. But to him, it was a life, and he had actually enjoyed it. Only at the age of 13 did he begin to hear them once more, and by that time, he was well into the school year. Hearing voices start conversing with you in the middle of class again had been strange. Fortunately, he was able to convince his teacher to allow him to see the nurse after nearly losing it. The medications he had been taking to control his issue stopped working after that, and he started hearing them constantly once more. Although he did not fully understand why the pills worked in the first place, in retrospect it made sense that they would stop working, particularly if they were souls. But he never told anyone. He was too terrified of what his parents would say and what the doctors might have done to him. Issei was the only person he had told, and she had vowed to keep the resurfacing a secret. When he began to hear them frequently, he also made a special effort to assist him whenever he needed it. What was he supposed to say to them now that he truly understood who they were? Was he meant to get in touch with them and begin to wonder why they had been attempting to speak with him for so long? Instead of forcing him to live his life thinking he was insane, why didn't they simply tell him what they were in the first place? Of course, at the time, he would have thought they were crazy if they were anything else, but to be honest, it bothered him to learn that doctors had been telling him he was crazy for all these years. In fact, he had begun to believe that he was. But to realize now that he wasn't, that they weren't merely delusions. He simply felt mentally and physically spent after everything that had happened in less than a day. At this point, he couldn't even bring himself to care that these things annoyed him. All he was aware of was, "Naruto, are you awake yet, honey?" The blonde, mentally spent, turned to face his desk clock and gazed blankly at the 7:50 that flashed across the screen. All things considered, he was late for breakfast because he had been so engrossed in his thoughts that he had missed his alarm. Since he was young, his mother had instilled in him the importance of arriving on time for breakfast in order to avoid being painfully and humorously struck in the back of the head by a spoon. He had virtually never been late for breakfast again by the time he was 11. He cocked his head slightly when he heard a knock on the door and saw his mother's honey. Brown eyes looked through it, quickly finding him on his bed with his back to it and goggles in hand. She swung the door open completely and gave him a worried look rather than a stern one. "Son?" she inquired softly as she slowly entered the room. She looked over his body and said, "Naruto, are you okay? You're never late for breakfast." He silently thanked her for using magic to quickly regenerate his cells without leaving scars. "You're not even dressed yet and school starts in 40 minutes. The blonde kept quiet as she tried to come up with something to say to her. Could he really tell his mother what had happened? Even though he loved her, could he really tell her that mythological creatures had tortured him and his friend? Could he tell her that he had lost himself in his anger and had set a fire after his friend was killed in front of him? Should he tell her that he defeated one of his friend's killers, acquired strong magic, and then cowardly fled after dropping his friend's body in front of the hospital? Did he really want to expose her to a secret that he had to learn and now have to live with? He therefore told her the lie rather than the truth he had discovered. He put down the goggles and tried to look sheepish as he said, "Sorry, Mom, at least that wasn't a lie. I didn't sleep well last night. After all, partial truths were the foundation of the best lies. I had a nightmare and kind of lost track of time." His mother sat down beside him on his bed and put a hand on his shoulder, softening his expression even more. "Want to discuss it?" she asked, trying to find out what was bothering him. "It may help you." He thought absently, "It probably would if I didn't want to keep you safe," and then he turned to respond. "Sorry Mom, but it's not really something I can put into words. It's just a bad feeling is all." After a moment of hesitation, his mother sighed and got to her feet. "All right," she replied, keeping her gaze fixed on him. "Are you going to be okay to go to school?" He thought absently, "If I don't it will look suspicious," and he suddenly felt like a criminal evading the law. "Technically I am a criminal now that I think about it. You don't just drop a dead body off at the hospital and run away like nothing happened." "Naruto," his mother said again, interrupting his thoughts when he realized he had not yet responded to her query. Sorry, Mom, he quickly apologized again. She gave him a final glance before nodding and leaving the room. Yeah, I'll go to school. Just give me a few minutes to get dressed and I'll be down in a bit. Before the light tapping signaled that she was going downstairs, he heard her footsteps reverberating down the hall. With a little sigh, he took himself almost languidly from his bed, stretching lightly in the process. He went to his closet and whispered to himself, I wish I could tell her. I wish I could tell her how foobar things went yesterday. As he removed another set of uniforms from the hanger, a luminous red circle formed around the top of his hand. The Red Welsh Emperor said, You and I both know you can't do that, partner. You're merely bringing someone else into this mess if you tell her that. The ruthless voice from its mental link said, Dragon's right, kid, which he now realized was what they called the method used to communicate with him because they weren't really in his head. Telling her would be nothing but trouble. Voice or whatever the hell your name is, just shut up, the blonde snarled over their connection. We'll talk tonight and not before, got it? As Naruto pulled his button up and started to button it, the voice stayed silent, indicating that it had received the picture. Once more, his hand glowed. Dietrich asked, Don't you think you're being a little bit harsh with them? Even before you and I signed a contract, they did provide you with a lot of assistance last night. Can't you be a little more forgiving of them? With a sigh, Naruto pulled up his pants and gazed at his glowing hand. I know that, but they've been making me think I was crazy for years and now they just suddenly start helping me out of the blue, he said. You don't find that weird in any way, shape, or form? In any case, shouldn't you pay attention to what they have to say? In fact, it might be significant. The dragon was right. Whatever they had to say could easily explain why they were acting the way they were. He could acknowledge that perhaps a tiny part of him was being spiteful at this point, but he didn't want to face the consequences. Not right now. Tonight, he could manage it. The blonde said, I know that, but with what happened yesterday I need to be prepared, as he completed his everyday outfit by tying his tie and securing the goggles to his head. I dropped Issei's body off at a hospital last night. With the fire and the dead body of a student appearing out of nowhere, someone is bound to start trying to connect the dots, and that will more likely than not be the police. I'm going to need to be able to think without voices rattling in my head today, and so far just pushing dealing with them to the side is better for now. It might seem harsh, but at this point it is the best I can do. You are aware that taking Issei's soul away just made you have a heart attack, aren't you? After pausing, the blonde turned back to face his glowing hand. Removing a sacred gear causes a heart attack? Naruto, you must comprehend something. All bodily systems stop working when the soul departs from the body. Now, if you pass away naturally, for example, from old age, the soul will exit the body because the body has aged too much and lacks the life force to hold it. But when a soul is taken away violently, as was the case with Issei, it behaves almost like a heart attack. All of your stored life force and the energy that powers your body abruptly evaporates. Blood, which is the lifeblood of all living things, simply stops flowing to the proper locations when bodily parts suddenly stop working properly. Usually, the heart is the first organ to fail. I say this because I think it will look like a heart attack to the humans when they examine Issei. That's the main idea, though it's actually far more complicated than I'm describing. You mean to tell me that this whole thing is going to look like an out-of-nowhere medical problem for Issei? That this will just look like all one big chance of fate or something? I wouldn't put it that way, but that's the main idea. Again, it's far more complicated than I'm expressing, but yes, from the perspective of the typical human eye. In other words, unless the average person has figured out how to scan for life energy and look for remnants that should be there but aren't, and then we just get into a whole other branch of magical explanations that I never understood, since the last time I had a host that used me. I was never as good at understanding magic mechanics as that stupid white, scaled bastard was. Naruto was thinking deeply about the situation and made a note to inquire about the scaled white bastard at a later time. This was a good thing, even though it hurt to think so. It implied that fewer people would be inquiring about what transpired. That way, he had to tell fewer lies. But he was also saddened that most people would never know how Issei actually died, not even his parents. Naruto sighed and went to retrieve his bag from beside his desk. Last night, while traveling to the hospital, he discovered it inside the unmarked van that his captors had reportedly abandoned. The keys had also been left in the car by idiots. It had been fairly simple to get at it, and he took his and Issei's bags with him after noticing that nothing was missing. Naruto shut the door to his room and went downstairs to the kitchen, where he discovered his mother reading the morning paper at the table. He was grateful to find a hastily prepared breakfast across from her that he could consume on the run. He kissed his mother on the cheek as he walked up directly beside her. "Morning officially, Mom," he said, taking a drink of water from the sink and a cup from the cabinet beside the table. "What are you reading about?" His mother put the paper down and folded it again, her expression bewildered. She took a sip of the tea she was drinking next to her and said, "Nothing. It seems that there was a fire at the abandoned church yesterday on the other side of town," without even noticing her son's eyes widen. According to the initial findings, apparently the church wasn't as abandoned as everyone thought. After they managed to put the fire out, apparently they found the charred remains of several people in the basement as well as several weird-looking altars. Police are calling them a cult of some kind. A cult, eh? At least he was aware that his usual way of thinking was correct when he asserted that they were. Even though he was now aware that his conclusions were incorrect, it was still a wise guess on their part. Even though he didn't intentionally start the fire, he still felt bad about it, but it was already done, and there was nothing he could do about it. Naruto gulped down some water, relishing the cool sensation as it ran down his now aware, extremely dry throat. Naruto made a mocking remark, "Wonderful," and played along, seeming taken aback. Never expected a cult to pop up in town. Guess they show up where we least expect them now, don't they? His mother looked at the front page of the destroyed church and remarked, "I just never thought something like that could happen here." She then shot him a stern look and said, "Everyone thought that place was abandoned and now this pops up. Honestly. After this, Naruto, I don't want you out too late for a while, do you understand me? And if you have to call. Your father and I went to bed last night knowing you were with Issei probably, but please just let us know when you're going to be late and what you're doing so I don't have to be such a worried mother." Naruto only smiles slightly to maintain appearance even though he knows that what she said was not entirely true. He glanced at the clock and saw that it was 8:10, and he had to leave for school. "Okay mom, I got ya." Aware that the day would not be pleasant, Naruto picked up his bag from the chair and his breakfast from the table before making his way to the door. He yelled, "I'll see you later mom," as he headed to school. 8:20 a.m., Kuo Academy, old student building. The student council president was staring at the person seated across from her, and the room fell silent. Despite the four people's present expressions, the room was tense. Given the circumstances, she would have been shocked if it hadn't. The house of worship that was their natural opposite did not suddenly blow up, nor was it typical for an amazing amount of magical power to appear and then disappear in the same location. Finding out that one of the potential members had also been discovered dead that evening in front of a hospital was far worse. These discrepancies were what drew the four of them together this morning in the hopes of solving these issues and putting them to rest. Sona Sitiri, who her human peers called Suna Shitori, was only able to sigh as she stared at her red-headed friend's dejected expression. The girl with the black bob cut decided to break the silence and adjusted her glasses. "I hope you understand that when I told you to recruit him that you should have, and now that you've screwed up for not doing so," she said harshly. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to remain calm as she explained, "Because of your inability to get your act together, the fallen that took root in the area decided to beat you to the metaphorical punch instead, and now one of the students under my care is dead. Do you know what you've done, Rias?" With crimson hair spread out and blue-green eyes lost in contemplation, the girl seated across from her merely sighed as she encircled her arms and pushed up her already enormously ample bust. She had a slight frown on her face, which told Sona more than words could right now. She knew she was to blame, and her heart was heavy with regret. Sona, however, chose to press the knife in further rather than let the thought rest. "You, like I, are the caretaker of this territory. What happens here is our responsibility, and a student has died under our watch, a sacred gear user no less, and a possibly powerful one at that. I left him alone because you had told me that you would be making him a member of your peerage, but it appears that I should have done something instead. What were you waiting for, Rias? Why did you wait?" At this point, the young devil from the Sitiri household was quite interested. Usually smarter than this, Rias was her rival and a friend she had known since childhood. She was too concerned about people to allow things to get worse, so she didn't make these kinds of mistakes. She treated her peers as if they were family, and she held her rival in high regard for that. However, this mess shouldn't have arrived. This was exactly what happened at school, and it shouldn't have gotten to the point where one of the students passed away due to complacency. The redhead's mistake could not be explained in any other way. What exactly had occurred, then? Bringing a delicate hand to her head, the red-haired Grammary heiress gingerly rubbed her temple as if she were nursing a headache, but all she could do was sigh. She said, "I don't know, Sona," in a typically upbeat but deeply dejected tone. "I had not expected this. I had thought that the fallen wouldn't have acted this quickly. I had thought that the fallen observing him would have taken her time. I had been planning to give him a leaflet and—" From behind her master's chair, Sona's right hand Tsubaki's voice asked, almost incredulously, "Use the innate human desire to live to summon you after she stabbed him, is that it?" She clarified once more, albeit a little more harshly, "You were planning to let him be killed and then summon you where you would revive him, where you would look to you as some sort of savior and develop a complex toward pleasing you." It was one of several ways to acquire a servant, and if you had to ask Sona, it was also one of the crueler ones. Some devils had adopted this practice in their quest for able-bodied servants. Allow someone from a different faction to kill them, and the devil in question can then bring them back to life just as they are about to die. It has an additional effect in addition to leading the new servant to believe that the other side must be inherently cruel and that being a devil is not as horrible as many would believe. Because their new master has saved their lives, it usually makes a servant more obedient and willing to obey orders. Upon reflection, it is basically fundamental psychology. Every now and then, they broadcast news reports about heroic deeds in which someone has saved the life of another, both in the human world and their own. At first, it's an act of kindness, but as a result of what transpired, some of these individuals maintain contact and form enduring friendships. The evil peace system, which can essentially bring people back to life as long as they haven't been dead for too long, could have the same effect. When a devil brings someone back to life, it's like their master saved them from death, which either creates an attachment or serves the betterment of life dead in general. It was one of the worst types of manipulation, in a sense. Still, Sona thought to herself as she gazed at the redhead, to think that she was going to let the boy die first. Strategically it makes sense, but it just seems cold of her overall. That's not like her. Sona could only come up with one explanation for why she might have employed such a tactic, but she chose not to investigate it further just yet. The young heiress let out a sigh. Please tell me that was not what you were thinking of, Rias? When she lowered her head a little, the person the underworld had dubbed the crimson-haired ruin princess only confirmed her initial theory. I was planning to revive him right after. There would have been no harm done to our precious little junior. Akeno, the stunning girl with long black hair who stood behind Rias, said, regardless of what happened though, the one known as Issei Hyodo is dead. The question is how we deal with the situation. Akeno Himejima was usually quite happy, regardless of what she said. However, she only looked at her beautiful features solemnly today. Sona was surprised to see the sadness in her purple eyes, even though she didn't think Akeno was usually heartless. Simply put, she had not anticipated it. There is no chance of recovery, is there? Rias murmured. With a sigh, Sona reclined in her chair and softened her gaze. She said, unfortunately no, with frankness. If we were going to recover him and his body for revival, we should have done it earlier. By now he is more likely than not in a human morgue being autopsied if his parents already gave permission. Also take into account that even if they weren't, that police already would have begun filling out reports and the media would have probably received a leak about someone dying too. It is not necessarily high-profile worthy, but the case of his sudden death on the same night the church burned will most certainly turn a few intrigued heads. There will be too big a paper trail to cover up even if a mass hypnotism was used. At this point it is out of our hands. And of the fallen angels, Akeno inquired, her tone cautious as she brought up the main issue. Something in her eye conveyed her feelings for them quite effectively. Pure hatred. It was undoubtedly present now if it hadn't been previously. I went and investigated the church personally after most of the police left, and I could hypnotize the few that remained, Tsubaki stated. It was definitely a hideout for the fallen angels and the humans associated with them. From the few things I could make out, they had various ritual circles I could not recognize set up. However, I could find no signs of whether or not they would be coming back. I can say one thing though for sure. Whoever they had down there fought them because there were signs of a struggle. Sona raised a curious eyebrow as she turned to face her queen. She said, what do you mean, Tsubaki? Could it have been Hyodo? Tsubaki adjusted her own eyeglasses. I do not believe so, she quickly stated. Observing their bewildered expressions, she clarified, unless Hyodo suddenly gained control over the little magical ability he was thought to have and managed to blow the head off the body of one of the fallen exorcists present, then no. One of the bodies, according to the officers at the scene, was missing its head. Not even the skull remained intact from whatever punched it. Issei Hyodo was nowhere near strong enough to do something like that, as it is physically impossible for a human to crush a person's head, nor did he have enough magic, as observed by everyone in this room, to perform such a feat. The logical conclusion was that they had another person there as well with them who was capable of such things, as well as not among the dead. Rias raised her head in her hand resting on an armrest and said, there's something else, isn't there? Rias nudged Tsubaki a bit more because it seemed reluctant to bring it up. Come on, Tsubaki. If you're holding something back, I need you to tell us now. I agree, Tsubaki, Sona said, glancing at her queen. Please tell us. The hypnotized officer whom I was asking questions let me in on another piece of information while I was there. Apparently, nearby, an entire area within the forest had become a sandpit. As if it didn't register, Akeno asked, a sandpit? Surely you're joking? No, I went and visited it myself. Right now the police are hiding it due to not even understanding how it happened themselves, but I know what I saw. From what I can guess, it was more likely an event caused by a high-class terrain transformation spell. I managed to sample a little magic left behind in the sand and managed to confirm the person who transformed the area was also the owner of the same signature of the person who released that massive burst of magical power. Rias rubbed her chin thoughtfully. I don't know of any devil houses who uses sand-based magic, do you, Sona? Her queen interrupted her rival before she could respond. If I may interject, my lady, she said after her master nodded. The signature did not feel like that of a devil's at all. In fact, it was very human. Though Sona was more adept at concealing her eyes than her friends, the other three women in the room felt theirs widen slightly. A human performing terrain transformation magic is not unheard of, but I can count the amount of magicians who are known to be able to do so on my hands, Rias said in disbelief. It is usually hard for them to perform such a feat, and only the most talented magicians can do so. We would have been able to tell if one were in the area. The others in the room looked at Akeno as he wondered, then what of the second prospect? Naruto Tachibana, who was friends with Hyodo, I might add, is also a prospect for having a sacred gear, is he not? Perhaps the struggle and the sand trap were him unlocking his sacred gear. Not only that, but he was said to have high magic potential based on his reserves. It would all fit into place, would it not? Rias acknowledged who she was referring to and nodded. That actually might make sense, Akeno. Rias paused, looking at the Cetiri heiress, who appeared understandably shocked. Rias squinted. Sona, weren't you supposed to monitor Tachibana? You did. After all, stake a claim in him like I did with Hyodo. Was his safety not your responsibility, much like mine was with my claim? Sona chose to remain composed and close her eyes rather than respond. Still maintaining a composed expression, she commanded, Tsubaki, please bring me Saji from the student council office, and do so quickly. After accepting the command, her queen vanished in two purple Cetiri circles. She observed Rias and Akino's expressions. My recently made pawn, Saji Genshiro, was tasked with studying Tachibana and looking out for him away from school grounds. He should be able to tell us that it wasn't Naruto. When her queen returned with her pawn, the symbol of House Cetiri emerged behind her. A young man with gray eyes and blonde hair named Saji moved to stand next to his master. What can I do for you, Madam President? His master said, Saji, without turning to face him, give me your evaluation of Naruto Tachibana. A slight frown formed on Saji's face as he scratched his head. Why do you want to know about that Yakuza-looking guy, Madam President? Tsubaki gave him a scowl. A symbolic arrow pierced Saji's heart as she persisted in her attack. Aside from the fact that you have a similar appearance that makes you look like a Yakuza, do I need to remind you in Lady Sona's place that you are more of a delinquent than Tachibana even comes close to being even before you began working for House Cetiri? Saji felt another arrow strike him. Need I also remind you that as of this moment he also has better grades than you as well? He asked. With so many arrows inside of him, Saji felt like a pincushion. He also seems to have more magical potential than you two. So please answer Our Lady's question. Saji started writing his report without further hesitation. Naruto Tachibana, currently 16 years in age and attending his second year the Kuo Academy. His grades are superb, one of the highest in the year, and is also well known for having good athletic abilities despite lack of training, or so it appears. Personality. Wise, he mostly keeps to himself due to people around the school saying he looks like a Yakuza thug and whatnot. From what I have managed to gather, however, is that Naruto is actually a nice person overall. He is polite for the most part but has a bit of a snarky streak as well. It is also recorded in official school records that he has a minor case schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, Rias said abruptly, at the admissions start. Are you saying that Naruto Tachibana, a young man with a rather calm demeanor, has such a mental disability? Sona said, I've looked into it personally, shocking everyone in the room. I've looked into his medical history and doctors have noted in sessions that he is rather high functioning for a schizophrenic and that it has managed to be controlled with drugs. Personally, I have come to believe that it was a form of sentient gear talking to him through an established link despite how rare they are. Rias noted with a little bewilderment, Sona, most of the well-known gears currently with the amount of sentience we're talking about are Longinus type gears. I had believed that Issei was the one with the Longinus. Sona reminded her, I did not say that Naruto had a Longinus type gear. She looked back at her pawn and said, I just implied that he had a piece of gear with some conscious sentience that was extending its hand toward him. Saji, have you been following Tachibana like I asked? Saji dutifully nodded his head. I have, Madam President, he declared with assurance. His master curtly questioned, then what did he do yesterday? The blonde student council member wrote, well, He went to a local cafe with Issei Hyodo and his girlfriend, oblivious to the terrified expressions that dominated the faces of both heiresses and their queens. They sat there talking for a while and I managed to listen in on their conversation. Hyodo's girlfriend was actually rather nice. I could see why the pervert was so head over heels for her. But then he became frustrated. But that bastard Tachibana made some comments almost like he didn't trust the poor girl. She talked about inviting them over for a game, and after Issei pulled him over to the side where the bastard had the audacity to say he didn't trust her. The nerve of that guy. I mean. Sona clutched the arms of her chair and ignored Saji as he went on a tirade about how much of a bastard Tachibana was. She thought rapidly. Naruto was near the fallen angel, her thoughts racing. Naturally, that blonde would be unfortunate enough to become involved in this before she could even speak with him about his predicament. More than a week ago, she had attempted to discuss it with him. In order to keep an eye on him and keep him safe, she would have asked him to join the student council. She would have then asked him to become a member of her peerage once she was certain of her choice. He seemed to have a lot of potential as a knight piece, rook, or pawn. Since his magic reserves appeared to be sufficient on their own, he could have used a variety of enhancement magics to augment his skills and likely would have performed well in any of the roles. In light of this, she wanted Naruto when she met with Rias to determine who would receive whom, possibly a Longinus user or not. Aside from that, she was attracted to him because of two things. The unidentified sacred gear and his ability to calm her sister, the latter of which she had truly desired. The blonde had captivated the Sidiri for some reason ever since she had met him during his first year. His ability to calm her sister initially piqued her interest. She had never encountered someone in her life who could calm an enthused Seraphal the way he could. Even her parents were unable to accomplish the feat, and for some reason, the blonde's name had an immediate calming effect whenever it was mentioned around her. When she asked her sister why she had calmed down for him after the incident, she blushed slightly and replied that his magical aura was just so super warm and inviting, and that she was actually quite happy. Since then, Sona had discovered something intriguing to ponder, and one day, as she saw him lying down in the grass, she made the decision to speak with him in an attempt to find out what Seraphal meant that particular day. She didn't fully comprehend at first. Even though he had been a year below her, the blonde was a good person to talk academically with because he was near the top of his year. He offered insightful commentary on subjects that she had initially only considered from one perspective, whereas it seemed he had considered them from another. She found herself doing it occasionally, enjoying the conversations despite not fully comprehending what her sister had said. She actually enjoyed the conversations, and she was shocked that she had not noticed it when her queen asked her one day, after she had returned from a conversation with the blonde, if she had been considering hiring him because of his potential for magic. She came to a realization at that very moment. In spite of the fact that she had been searching for something going into the conversations, she eventually forgot her goal, which was odd for her in and of itself. She had initially wondered how she had forgotten everything, but after reflecting on her conversations with him, she had come to an intriguing realization. He had started to seem like a friend to her. That was her first human one. There were no plans involving him in general, nor were there any hidden agendas to elevate him to her peerage. When she looked back on it, she realized how wonderful it was to have someone other than Rias or her queen with whom to have meaningful, lengthy conversations. At the time, it seemed a little strange to her. She had taught them that she was their master and should be treated as such, even though her peerage was undoubtedly full of good people. Sometimes it was quite lonely, and Naruto had given her a much-needed break. Then Rias realized that both he and his friend Issei would make excellent devils. Something inside of her told her that day not to allow the red-haired devil, who had shown interest in joining her peerage, to do so. Rather, she gave her Issei and promised to accept Naruto as a peer. Unexpectedly, her friend took it very well, joyfully declaring that she thought Issei had a Longinus and thanking her for sharing him with her. Rather than feeling deceived, she had been happy with the outcome anyhow. Thus, she started figuring out how to enlist Naruto in her army. The plan was pretty straightforward. She could now ask him to become an assistant on the student council because they had known each other long enough. He was undoubtedly not popular enough with the students to be elected, but it made no difference because he was appointed as the council's assistant. She would then gradually acclimate him to student council life and procedures before formally inviting him to join her peerage. Although it was undoubtedly one of her simpler schemes, in theory it ought to have worked out well. She had gone to recruit Issei Hyodo that day, but her plans had been derailed by his and his friend's perversions. Apparently, he had left before she could even ask because he felt he had to save his friend. She was so overburdened with student council work for the remainder of the week that she was unable to complete it. Now she learns that the person who was supposed to be her peerage member was so close to falling and she was completely unaware of it. The heiress with the black hair finally had enough. "Saji," she said, interrupting the boy's tirade and getting him to turn to face her. Observing her astonished expression, she made the decision to ask a question she would later come to regret. "Do you realize that girl was a fallen angel?" She rubbed her temple in frustration, bracing herself for a headache. "What happened, Saji? Where did they go after their conversation?" Saji started massaging his chin. "Well, after that He paused, his expression becoming expressionless. Sona concluded that there was indeed a headache. However, her queen took up the task before she could deal with it. "What do you mean you don't remember?" she questioned, her voice full of incredulity. "You can't really tell me that you forgot what they did, can you?" With a gesture toward her pawn, Rias's queen said, "If I may, Madam President." Akeno approached Saji, put her palm on his head, and nodded in agreement. She was using her magic, as evidenced by the slight glow on her body before it vanished, and she took a step back while her eyes widened. "Madam President, your pawn seems to have been afflicted with an angel's memory erase spell." "But how?" exclaimed Tsubaki, startled. "Their magic to erase memories doesn't affect non-humans. It was a spell developed specifically to deal with them." Rias responded, "Yes, but the evil peace system is not perfect," with a totally serious tone. "There are some gaps to it, especially within the first few months of turning someone into a reincarnated devil. For a short period of 3 months after the transformation, they can still be afflicted with magics like a fallen angel's memory manipulation spell. From what I understand, Saji has only been a devil for 2 months' time, has he not?" Sona came to the same conclusion and nodded. The head of the student council acknowledged, "You're correct," and shook her head. One of the fallen must have snuck up behind him and knocked him out before erasing the knowledge. Any experienced fallen would have been able to sense him watching the group and must have wanted to keep us from knowing what happened. Only Hyodo was reported among the dead as of this morning, nor have local police reported any kidnappings, so that means they heard someone outside yelling, "Naruto, you bastard," which made the 5 devils turn to face the window. With their respective peerage members trailing behind, Sona and Rias hastily stood up and made their way to the window. They witnessed a scene that would have been humorous if they had not known any different. Naruto Tachibana walked through the gate, looking just like he would have if his friend Issei had been going with him. The 2 other friends of Issei, Matsuda and Motohama, were quick to point this out to the blonde who kept ignoring them. However, their worst fears were now evident to the 4 seasoned devils. The lethargy that appeared in his eyes, the sudden increase in magical power they sensed from him, and the most glaring feature that proved their thoughts. The eyes. Their once vibrant eyes were now filled only with fear at what they could see. As he and the 2 perverts who were following him entered the main building, Saji continued to stare at him and chose to summarize the situation in a way that Sona thought was utterly obscene but might be the most accurate way to put it. "Oh fuck. 9 a.m., Kuo Academy Auditorium." Naruto Tachibana hated assemblies. For whatever reason, they were never very useful to him. If he and his peers could agree on anything, it was usually because they had gathered them for a vexing reason. Because one student had reportedly been caught using drugs, the administration once gathered them to read them a riot act about abstaining from drugs. He was certain that there was no serious drug problem at Kuo Academy. For starters, a large portion of the school's student body was supported by scholarships. If someone had been caught using drugs here, they would have been expelled like the poor sap they found the stuff with, in addition to losing their scholarship. The other reason was primarily due to the school's student body. The majority of attendees were students with high hopes for their future careers. People had to acknowledge that even the perverted trio were somewhat motivated, even if it was for the wrong reasons. There weren't many unmotivated students at Kuo. And that was just one instance. Teachers would occasionally speak to the class to remind them of impending events and to update them on what was happening. Additionally, the student council occasionally convened an assembly to discuss issues pertaining to students. Even though there weren't many assemblies, they were typically bothersome. A lot of people had assumed it would be the same. Nobody had anticipated seeing a large photo of one Issei Hyodo from the previous year's school yearbook standing in the auditorium with different kinds of flowers on stage next to it. Students were still seated in the rows to which their homerooms had been assigned, and whispers were heard throughout the auditorium. As the remaining students and their classes continued to stream into the room, teachers led their class inside and asked them to sit down. When teachers announced that they would be operating on a delayed schedule because homeroom would run until 9 for an assembly, many people wondered what would happen. This time, the class had conjectured about what it would be about. Some chuckled, assuming they were being called by the school to make a small announcement or something. However, it was simple to determine what had happened as soon as everyone entered the room. Students were forced to confront a reality that many of them had not previously considered because of the picture up on stage, the flowers, and the serious expressions on the faces of the administrative staff. Issei Hyodo was one of their own who had passed away. The blonde could sense the different emotions he had managed to release that night resurfacing with a vengeance as she looked up at the still image of his face. The image of his friend sitting on stage, staring at him with those expressive eyes and practically asking him why the blonde did not do more to save him, brought back all the pain, rage, and desperation. His eyes filled with dried tears, and he wasn't alone. For the first time since they had known each other, Matsuda and Motohama sobbed over something that was not perverted after they finally understood why their friend had not shown up this morning. They were seated a few seats away from him. As they glanced at one another and then at him, tears streamed down their faces and landed on their uniforms. As the expressions of regret began to creep in, a tiny flicker of understanding passed through their eyes, finally understanding why he had been cold to them earlier. All three of them experienced a sense of collective sadness for the first time in their long history together. When the principal, a man with gray hair and a rather diminutive build, entered the assembly room and stood next to a few of the administrators and teachers, the students started to quiet down. Every individual in the front was significant to the school in some way. They exchanged sorrowful and regretful glances. At last, the principal started. He began by saying, "Thank you all for coming today," his voice resonating over the microphone and a little higher pitched. "We have come here today to inform you, as you might have guessed already, that one of our own has passed tragically last night. Issei Hyodo, a second-year student, was found near the hospital last night at around 11:45 last night." It was eerily quiet in the room. The thought caused Naruto to tighten his grip, and there were no signs of surprise or dismay. But the principal saw it as an opportunity to carry on. Preliminary tests have shown that Mr. Hyodo passed on due to a sudden attack of an unknown kind upon his system. The leading physician on the case, however, has concluded that it ended up giving him a heart attack. Make no mistake, however, that his death was of natural causes and from what doctors say was, more likely than not, painless. Naruto's hold on his seat became so tight that he feared it would shatter. Not painful? Did the doctors believe his death was painless? If only they understood the agony he was going through. If only they knew that, like a hero from a shonen manga, Issei managed to get a few cool lines in before he died, despite the immense pain he had endured. Mr. Hyodo was a valued member of the community and a student whom came here into our care who was ready to leave the next year prepared for the world. As school staff and administrators, it was our responsibility to oversee his education, to nurture and care for our students as though they were our own. It is sad to see such a passionate flame burn out before his time. But we must persevere. We will be here for you, our students, so that you may talk and share your feelings. Grief counselors are also available at your convenience if you need them. Why would we? A woman in the crowd inquired. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm glad the stupid pervert is dead. He and his perverted friends stole my underwear once. Another voice yelled, yeah, in defiance. That pervert peeked on me and the rest of the softball team when we were in the showers. If we're talking about anything, why did the school administration not do anything when they peeped on a lot of the girls in the school? Naruto started to turn red, and the room started to echo with murmurs of agreement. These folks dared to spit on his friend's memory. He was a good man, but he might have been a pervert. This was not fair to him. This was not what he deserved to hear at the end of his life. These people spit on his memory even after he's dead. In the row opposite him, a girl who had been sitting in the aisle got up. She shouted, "Why should we mourn a scourge to society like Hyodo?" and disobeyed the administrator's orders to sit down. He and his little friends terrorized all the females at this school, treating us like we were objects to be admired. And that was all he ever did. I bet the little pervert didn't even have plans for the future. In my opinion, he's better off dead. Naruto's hair hid his eyes as he stood up suddenly. The rest of the students fell silent as he approached the girl, moving slowly at first. They were all aware of his friendship with Issei. The king of perverts was best friends with the Yakuza impersonator. The fact was well known. He kept walking toward the girl who had spoken, and she turned to face him. She sneered, "What's the matter, Yakuza boy? Did I hurt your feelings? Did you really expect me to say nothing? Are you going to silence me now? What are you going to?" A fist to the face silenced her and sent her flying onto the other people in her row. The room was silently shocked as Naruto struck someone for the first time. As he looked at the girl who was massaging her cheek from the punch's pain, they gazed at him. Even the administrators did nothing because they were too shocked that a high-scoring student would act out like this towards someone, even if they had made fun of him. The girl stood up and stammered. You hit me," she barked. Instead of sending him backwards, she slapped him across the face, turning his head so she could finally see his eyes. You're finally showing your true colors. you damned Yakuza," she said. She unconsciously took a step back in fear as the two azure orbs glared at her with such intense hatred. They weren't the eyes of a typical person. Before he spoke, Naruto just kept staring at her. He whispered, "Fuck you," and then slowly stood up so that everyone could hear him. "Go fuck yourself. He might have been a pervert to you, no to everyone else, but do not mistake someone for not giving a fuck because he was a pervert." Naruto gritted his teeth in rage and tightened his fists until they started to bleed. "Issei had been my friend since we were young, and even though other kids teased me about my scars on my cheeks and my general appearance, he simply told me to laugh it off. He was always there to cheer me up with a funny joke or some other silly antics. But to you, he might have been just a pervert, but to me, he was my one and only friend, someone I would never be able to laugh with, joke with, or cry with when we needed a good laugh. Therefore, don't sit on your high horse and say that someone's death is acceptable, as if it were something to accept, or that no one will miss them. He had me, Matsuda, and Motohama who were his friends. Our childhood friend Irina would be sad to know that he is now gone. Despite everything, his mother, father, aunts, uncles, and cousins all still adored him. You dare say that we shouldn't grieve for him? Should I comment that you will not be missed as a raving bitch, as you were on your deathbed? No, because that would make me as much of an asshole as you and, presumably, the other idiots at this school." When he reached the exit, he walked through the hastily opened door and as it closed, flipped the bird to everyone in the auditorium, not even caring about them at this point. The blonde started toward the door, ignoring the deafening silence he received, passing rows of students who could only stare at the blonde, who usually kept to himself, in mute shock, having never expected the outburst from him. For the next few minutes, the room would be in stunned silence, with nobody, not even the girl who had said what she had said, knowing how to react. Kuo Park, 11 a.m. The blonde thought to himself, "I am so getting expelled," as he gazed out at the park's greenery. He was sitting on a small brown bench for three in the park's corner, where he and Issei usually sat whenever they visited, and from there they had a lovely view of the park's towering tree system and some of the closed off flower-filled sections. It had been their favorite place to hang out and chat, just like the week before when they visited the last time, because not many people visited the area in general. He, Issei, and Irina had visited the place often since they were young, and after their friend left, it became specifically their place. They had created many memories there with their games and antics, and in their childish joy, they had believed that the park was their playground, a fantastical world where they could defeat monsters, demons, witches, dragons, and so many other things that he couldn't even list them all. They had foolishly even considered going on a quest to catch and fight a leprechaun once, after seeing a ridiculous American film that featured one as a villain of some sort. Looking back, the idea seemed foolish now, but to them as children, it was brilliant. It was here that Issei started to have his perverted fantasies, and to the dismay of the brown-haired boy, Naruto would laugh on the ground whenever they were mentioned. Eventually, as they grew, the games gradually came to an end, and it was reduced to a place where they could hang out and talk, say whatever they wanted, and avoid any consequences from others. That was just one of the many topics they had come to discuss over the years. But now it all comes to an end, doesn't it? He reminded himself as he ate slowly from the bowl of ramen on his lap. Ramen was something he had grown fond of since he was a child. He had always liked it and had been able to eat even a few bowls before he was ever full. Of course, his mother didn't let him eat it at home as much as he would have liked, but that was because she had said it was bad for him and would stunt his growth if he ate it constantly. For whatever reason, he couldn't figure out. In spite of this, ramen had eventually evolved into a comfort food that he consumed on special occasions or simply when he was depressed, and this had been one of those occasions. He heard a pair of footsteps slowly approaching from the left of him as the blonde continued to slurp his ramen. Of course, he didn't care if there were, just because this was their spot didn't mean they didn't get the occasional person who came through on a jog or something. Because he and Issei were usually so loud, they tended to get looks from them, but it never really bothered him. Issei had particularly enjoyed it when a girl came through on a jog, admiring the tight spandex shorts and tight running shirt most had tended to wear. A voice from his front said, "You're a hard person to find, Mr. Tachibana," jolting him out of his reverie as he saw a pair of black loafers in his line of sight toward the ground. He was a little taken aback because he hadn't heard the person stop in front of him. "Sorry I'm so hard to find," he sighed. "Look, if you're from the school administration telling me I've been expelled for my earlier actions, just leave the official notice here and shove the hell off," the blonde remarked dryly without looking up, not feeling like dealing with whoever it was. "I'm not feeling it. While I must admit the outburst in your auditorium did not exactly match your psychological profile, that is not why I'm here," the voice said, keeping the pair of shoes motionless. "I'm here more along the lines of asking you some questions about the death of your friend." A detective, huh? The blonde thought to himself as he looked up, only to be taken aback by what he saw. A person his own age, with a boyish-looking face, short brown hair styled in a layered crop, snow white skin, and a slim, fit build overall. The most striking feature was his ovular steel-rimmed glasses with piercing yellow eyes peering out from behind him. His mouth was twisted into a small, thin line, displaying no overall thoughts or emotions. As he scanned the teenager wearing the white button-down shirt, he asked himself, "They let people my age be detectives, and why would you need to question me?" Issei's death was caused by nature, wasn't it? He was not about to allow another innocent person to perish, so he kept his face composed and demonstrated that he knew nothing in spite of the contrary. He also couldn't allow this man to become involved because if he did, the fallen angels might try to kill him as well. Normally most people might consider what happened to subject Issei Hyodo to be just an unnatural case of unexplainable sudden death, he replied curtly, bending his head forward to allow his glasses to slip down his head lightly. The blonde's eyes widened as he saw the brown-haired teen's eyes glow lightly, becoming slightly unnerving to the blonde. "However, these eyes of mine tell me that your friend had his soul, as well as a sacred gear, more likely than not removed from his body due to a ritual created by the fallen angels. Is it possible that that statement is incorrect?" The blonde swung his right arm out as if almost instinctively, but his surprise was short-lived when he saw the teen in front of him easily block it with his own arm. He also heard a soft click in his ear as he cocked his head slightly upward to see a gun barrel sitting on his temple, which was clearly caused by unlocking the safety. The whiskered teen felt the cold metal against his forehead and realized how much trouble he was in, especially when he looked into the glowing eyes of his new captor. They assured him that if he had to pull the trigger, he would do so without hesitation. He realized that he had made a mistake and now knew two things. First, that the teen before him was not a normal person, and that the blonde did not know where his loyalties lay. Second, that this might have been an assassin sent by his captors from the previous night to complete the task that the fallen angel Donasek was unable to complete. It would have made sense. They might have realized that he probably would have expected another of their kind to follow him, and they would have attempted to prepare as such so they would catch him off guard by sending one of his own kind. And third, they had other human followers, so human assassins would not be unlikely. He had already had his ability to withstand blunt force trauma tested, but he was not looking forward to testing his ability to withstand a bullet to the brain. The second thing he realized was that he did not like having a gun pointed at his head. It was very uncomfortable, though that much should have been obvious. He apparently had superpower magic or something, but still feared a gun? That was kind of messed up, he decided, but realized it was true. Humans were not durable creatures, as that fallen angel was quick to point out last night. The brown-haired boy said lightly, "I see that look in your eyes," as if the teenager in front of him could read his thoughts. "You think I'm here to kill you, don't you?" Naruto was unable to avoid it in spite of the circumstances. "Don't you think that the gun pointing at my noggin kind of obviously says that?" With his blue eyes fixed on the glowing yellows of the person holding him at gunpoint, the tan teenager joked. "You attacked me so I needed a way to keep you in line so I could ask my questions," the brunette challenged, his monotone faltering a little. It was the proper reaction to the situation. The blonde quickly retorted, "I reacted negatively because you mentioned the fallen angels and soul removal issue. How can I be certain that you don't work for the fallen? They seem to have a large number of human followers, based on what I was able to learn last night. I apologize if that made me a little agitated." The teen with the glowing yellow eyes stared at the blonde for a moment before calmly responding, "I'm not an agent of the fallen," holstering his weapon in its brown casing on his belt. "I'm investigating the situation for my organization so we can try and resolve the matter of what happened." The blonde felt the gun slowly leave his temple and slid back against the bench in relief. The blonde kept giving him a doubtful look. "And who exactly do you work for?" gently nudged the blonde. The teenager in front of him adjusted his glasses back above his eyes, and the glow that illuminated them vanished as if they had never been there. He then gently adjusted his black tie and reached into his back pants pocket to retrieve a black leather-like badge casing, which the blonde opened to see what was written on it. "I am Hayate Fujihara," the newly renamed Hayate said, "and I am an agent of the Occult Defense Department, an organization established under the authority of the major global powers of the 1970s. There was a large golden shield inside the case with an occult-based star in the center. Our goal is to defend humanity against any supernatural forces that might try to subjugate us while, whenever feasible, forming alliances with other religious organizations." "Please don't tell me you go under the acronym ODD," Naruto groaned as he sat there listening to their explanation in mute shock before pointing out something that was bothering him. "That was a very astute assumption, Tachibana," the agent said with a hint of surprise. "That is indeed correct. Hayate blinked quickly. Who decided that was a good name for the freaking organization? Oh come on, Naruto yelled. Before you were given that name, did anyone notice how foolish that sounded? Hayate casually remarked, well, according to the director, S.H.I.E.L.D. was originally up for grabs until someone realized that the American comic book group Marvel already owned the name, which made Naruto palm his face. But regardless of our name, our duty is to protect people. The incident that happened last night involved a young man who died after having his sacred gear taken away from him in this area, which is typically fairly well taken care of by said devils. I want to know why all of this occurred. The blonde questioned, and how did you know I was there, as he acknowledged Hayate's logic. You unlocked your magic last night, didn't you? Hayate said, sitting next to him and looking directly into his eyes. Everybody's magic has a unique signature, meaning every signature feels different from one another, the agent said, observing the blonde nod. Every signature is unique. Your point? Asked Naruto bluntly, unable to see the direction of this conversation. Why didn't you think it was one of the fallen angels' magic or something if we're talking about unique signatures? Look, to put it simply, every time a person uses magic a bit of it remains in the air or, in case of the spell you used last night, in the area you transformed, Hayate remarked to himself, rubbing the bridge of his nose. It appears I am speaking to someone with absolutely no magic experience, he said, ignoring Naruto's angry expression. To find your distinct signature, all I needed to do was analyze the sand grains. After that, it was simple to find you, especially with your enormous magic signature. You have more magical power than most high-class devils, did you know that? High-class devil, Naruto asked inquisitively. When I fought the angel last night he said I had virtue-class magic levels. Yes, since he was using a magic level scale created by angels, Hayate answered. Maybe we'll talk about that more later. I need you to tell me what happened last night for the time being. Still not entirely sure if he should tell, Naruto hesitated a little. What would you do with what I tell you? The blonde inquired. To be honest with you, I'm not sure. Everything would rely on what you told me. The agency might be able to assist in taking action against assaults in the future if it's something beneficial, particularly if there is a similarity to the other cases. Right now, you are the only one who has managed to avoid having their sacred equipment taken from them. If there is anything we can learn from your experience, we can use it to inform our future searches. With a slight start, Naruto recalled Rainier saying that she had performed the ritual previously and questioned whether she was responsible for any of the cases they were aware of at the time. If so, she was likely to repeat the ritual repeatedly, which would cause more suffering and death, and he didn't want that. Naruto said, it started a week ago, starting out quietly while the person sitting next to him listened intently. About a week ago, Issei came to school all delighted and everything. Issei's tendency to be perverted about a lot of things surprised me and his two other friends, Matsuda and Motohama. At first, the three of us were somewhat in denial about the entire situation, but when he brought in a photo of her the following day, I began to believe. As he quickly took out a pad and pen to start taking notes, Hayate asked, what did this girl look like? I need some specific features. You don't exactly forget the looks of the person who killed your best friend, especially when her disguise looked like that. Long black hair that went down her back, smooth face, violet eyes, and she had the figure of someone you would see out of those teenage idol magazines, the blonde said quickly, recalling every detail of her appearance. He was certain that she was a beautiful girl with a black heart who would kill you without hesitation, even if it wasn't her true appearance. The ODD agent said blankly, that's enough of a description, and waved his hand. Please, continue with what happened. The girl, Yuma, arrived to hang out with him after school the following day after displaying the picture to us. I congratulated him, but Matsuda and Motohama cursed him out when they realized she was real. Naturally, I regret that now that I know what I do, but... Hayate abruptly interrupted, could you please skip the reminiscing? Just concentrate on yesterday's events. What caused the incident to begin? Naruto growled angrily, well, if you would have stopped interrupting me in the first place maybe I would have gotten there by now, since he could not stand someone constantly interrupting him and he had very little tolerance for it. It was already awful that the man appeared emotionless. I apologize if this offends you, but I am trying to get to the root of yesterday's events, Hayate said, blinking at him once more. Please, continue on, but know that I may have to stop you in a few places for clarification. All the blonde could do was nod. All right. In any case. When Issei asked me to meet him and his girlfriend at a cafe last night, that's when the trouble started. I went because I wanted to meet the girl in person, but there was something very strange about her that made me want to avoid her. I tried asking her for information even though I was apprehensive about it. He noticed a flash of insight in the eyes of the person seated beside him. Is something wrong? No, please continue. All right, so after a while she asked if we wanted to play a game with her and her pals. Issei persuaded me that it would be a good way to meet people, so even though I really didn't want to, I reluctantly agreed. She said she would take us to the game, and she led us to a white van outside the store. Naturally, I ought to have been wary of all the strange, priest-like men in the van, but I gave in. The next thing I know, I wake up with a cloth over my eyes attached to some cross and being dragged up a set of stairs, the blonde said, leaning forward and crossing his arms over his chest while gazing at the floor. When Issei and I were finally taken out of our blindfolds, we noticed some wielding men standing beside Yuma, with a group of those priest-like men behind them. I thought they were a cult, the teen with the whiskers said with a harsh laugh of desperation. They also had the appropriate appearance. At that moment, they made it clear to us that they were fallen angels, and Yuma, who was actually a person named Rainier, was one of them when she changed. And what was the actual form of this Rainier? She looked like an older version of Yuma dressed in some kind of weird-looking S&M outfit. What about the other angels? Are you able to recall their names and appearance? There were 3, indeed. Donasek, whose appearance is no longer important, Calawarner, a blue-haired woman wearing a suit jacket, and Middled, a short blonde who looked like Lolita in a black dress. Because yesterday you killed him in a fight, didn't you? Asked the teenage detective alike, seemingly already knowing his answer. The blonde wanted to say something but didn't in the end. He probably couldn't prove he didn't do it yesterday anyway. Instead of being reprimanded, however, the blonde only received a nod in response. It was to be expected. I discovered ash-like remnants in the sand. I take it that we will eventually reach that section? The blonde nodded hesitantly once more, and he simply waved dismissively. Then please, continue. She told Issei that she never loved him and just taunted us continuously when I was getting angry. He clenched his fist and said, Rainier, after revealing her true form, just mocked us. When she finally freed me from my bonds, I ran at her and attempted to punch her in the face out of foolish rage. I jumped to try to punch her with my fist when something inside of me suddenly clicked and magic surrounded it. It didn't work, I assume. Not in the slightest, the blonde grudgingly acknowledged. She simply vanished and gave me a back rub. She sent me skidding across the floor, but I managed to hit her by fighting through those foolish-looking priests. If Calawarner hadn't struck the woman in the stomach before stabbing my hands with 2 of those light spears, I would have eventually arrived. While taking notes and looking at Naruto's hands, Hayate remarked, interesting, noting that there was no evidence of scarring, contrary to what I would anticipate from such a thing. If you didn't know how to cast the right spell, how did you heal them? Naruto cringed inwardly. Sure, he was telling him what had happened to this guy, but should he really tell him about Shukaku and the other voices in his head? He knew they weren't just voices anymore, so it wouldn't be crazy to tell him. As it was, he was probably going to have to ask how he beat Donasek in the first place and show him the spear and boosted gear. So why not? Probably because a part of him was still getting used to the fact, and another part of him wanted to keep it a secret for the time being. Honestly, I don't know, the blonde said, continuing to look down in the hopes that the agent would believe her. I had just thought that it was magic or something that fixed my wounds after I exploded. At that point, Hayate seemed to have completely forgotten about the healing. Exploded? Please elaborate, he asked, his tone becoming monotonous with disbelief. Since that isn't at all in my notes, where did you blow up at any point in this story? I lost it and the world kind of went white after that bitch Rainier took Issei's gear off his chest and he passed away. The next thing I know, I'm carrying the equipment and carrying Issei on my back as I attempt to flee a burning building. I had assumed that when someone unlocked their magic, that was the typical response. As he took notes and gazed at him, Hayate's glasses dipped, exposing his bright yellow eyes. No, that's not the typical reaction at all, Hayate clarified, though I can see why it was reported that a giant beam of light appeared in the sky. You possess a great deal more magical power than most people who have been practicing for a long time could ever hope to acquire. Your magic reacted to your rage during the unlocking process and ultimately just exploded outward if what you're saying is accurate. So, it's not typical. Hayate merely sighed and rubbed his temple with the hand that held his pen. Tachibana, if what happened was the norm for most human magic users, you would have heard of more random explosions on the news by now, wouldn't you have? That would suggest that there are a lot of magic users out there now, wouldn't it? He shot back, asking for information in an open manner. To be fair, he was essentially giving up most of his knowledge and getting very little in return, so the exchange of information was not exactly fair. I see you want to know more about the overall situation, is that it? Hayate also seemed to see where this was going. In return, Naruto said, yes, I do, adding, I want to know exactly what I've gotten myself into. No nonsense. My friend is dead because of this world I've been forced to enter into, and I'm not going in blind if I can avoid it. Fair enough, the brown-haired boy readily conceded after seemingly considering his point and nodding. Please finish answering my questions and I will tell you the truth about the world. Alright? Naruto scowled at the offer, but he was aware that his condition was unlikely to improve. Fine. Alright. Now that we've resolved that, kindly keep updating me on what transpired. Enter the forest from the spot where you fled the flaming church. Then what? The fallen, who I assumed had been knocked unconscious, rose from the burning structure and took off after I entered the forest. I thought I might be safe, so I hid when I saw one flying in my direction. I tried to think of a way to bring Issei back to life while I was hiding. To see if it would work, I first tried placing his sacred gear on his chest. When that didn't work, I tried using my own power. You are aware that it most likely would have succeeded in blowing up your friend's body, aren't you? Naruto unintentionally slipped and then put his hands over his mouth. Yeah, Diedrich told me the exact same thing, he said. But Hayate was on high alert. Diedrich, he asked sharply, Diedrich, the Welsh dragon? The one they refer to as the Emperor of the Red Dragon? Issei, your friend, had the Longinus class equipment, boosted gear. How did it end up? I kind of put him on in order to help me survive. Excuse me, said Hayate, staring at him. You put him on to survive? Perhaps Diedrich had been mistaken. Perhaps he could have brought Issei back to life by reinstalling the gear. Perhaps he had actually been the cause of his friend's death. Well, I kind of was having trouble and he insisted that I couldn't use him to revive Issei, so I should put him on to survive, the blonde explained a little nervously. It would be clear to most people in the supernatural community that the Red Welsh was right when he stated that the equipment could not bring your friend back to life. Even though there hasn't been a documented instance of this occurring, he hasn't been known to simply accept a new wielder. Well, it did, Naruto said, feeling somewhat relieved that he hadn't killed his best friend by stealing the equipment. Show it to me, he insisted. Prove to me your story is true and show it to me. The gear appeared on his right arm as if he had called for it, the green gem in the middle of the hands sparkling as magnificently as it had the night before, the red gauntlet gaining a slight glint running across its scaled surface, almost a thing of beauty, more intended to be an ornament than a weapon for battle, but the abilities it gave the user would prove otherwise. Interesting, Hayate said simply as he lifted Naruto's gauntlet, covered hand and ran his finger across it. Quite frankly, you're already an abnormal user right off the bat, he said after removing his glasses completely and examining the gauntlet with sharp eyes. The equipment has shown up on the left arm of every other wielder. However, it appears on your right arm rather than your left, most likely because you put it on yourself. His monotone reverberated around them as he drew his eyes closer and started reading off statistics. Subject: boosted gear. One of the 13 Longinus class gears that the biblical god created. After the heavenly dragon Diedrich's soul was extracted from his dismembered body and given a containment unit to access the dragon's power, the equipment was made. With each boost, it can double the user's total power, which includes their physical, spiritual, and magical abilities. However, the drawback of this ability is that it rapidly depletes the user's stamina each time they boost, leaving them totally helpless once they reach their limit. However, there are no prerequisites for using its skills, placing it in the Longinus classification's middle-tier level strength. He gave Naruto a look and said, based on your own overall magic reserves you have the potential to become quite the strong wielder. Overall, it is a rather fearsome weapon within the right hands. Hayate had recited all of this information as if he knew it off the top of his head, and Naruto just sat there in disbelief. His glowing yellow eyes added to the eerie atmosphere, giving him the unspoken impression that they were looking into his soul. Did you know that you contain 9 smaller souls? In and of itself, that is highly unusual. Looking into the glowing eyes of the young agents, Naruto flinched back in shock at this point. What the hell, man? How do you know all of this stuff? Asked Naruto hastily. It's my sacred gear that can be found within my eyes, the brown-haired boy remarked softly as he tapped the side of his head close to his eyes. It's a rare type gear called ophthalmic parameter, nicknamed God's information dealer by previous users. He continued to examine the gear. In essence, it was created to help field generals better direct users of sacred gear in combat. The equipment gives me information about any holy equipment I come across or learn about its fundamental features. By looking at their souls, I can also find users of hidden gear and see their magic levels. Although it isn't specifically designed for combat, it is still very helpful overall and isn't as useful in combat as most other gear. So are all sacred gear like yours and mine? Naruto asked, simply sitting there and taking in the information. Essentially using video game cheat codes on foot. I'm afraid I don't quite understand, Hayate said, glancing at him and blinking. Are you referring to cheat codes? Which ones are those? Cheat codes, Naruto said, simply staring at him. Are you familiar with the small bugs or codes that grant you invincibility, limitless ammunition, or other advantages in video games? That sort of thing. I'm afraid I don't quite see the comparison, but if you're asking if there are sacred gears that provide invincibility or whatnot, then no. At this point, practically everyone knew what this stuff was, especially people his age, and the fact that he didn't made him wonder what exactly his organization had him do that he didn't know this stuff. Naruto didn't even want to know what this guy had been doing, that he didn't even know one of the basic staples of gaming, much to the annoyance of all true gamers. What was he supposed to say to such blatant lack of knowledge? If he just mocked it, he would feel bad, but what exactly was he supposed to say? I meant are all sacred gear like mine or yours in the sense of how powerful and or useful they are, Naruto said with a sigh. At last, Hayate released Naruto's arm and started writing in his notebook. No, he said, looking up and blinking at him once more. Again, boosted gear is one of 13 Longinus gears capable of killing gods once mastered. He continued, ignoring Naruto's disbelieving expression. Mine is once again a rare type, not very common but still has a few of them in existence if dormant. However, there are still many distinct gears, each with unique capabilities and applications. Naturally, some are more potent than others, but others, like the gear, twice critical, are also fairly common. Is your question answered by that? But Naruto had his sights set on something else. Are you saying that this, he said, gesturing to his arm covered in gauntlets, has the ability to kill a god? I am aware of Didrake's strength, but is it really capable of killing a god? Yes, boosted gear can kill a god with proper training, Hayate said, nodding. Whether you wanted it to or not, having it has made you a significant member of the supernatural community. Great, Naruto said, simply rubbing his head with his covered hand. So, I think I understand how you defeated the fallen angel the other night, but how did you use the sand to do that magic? You can't have another sacred item or no high-level transformation spells that cover a lot of ground by instinct. Before, I wore my glasses as a courtesy to keep my gear inactivated, but now that I'm looking at you closely, I can see that you only have one sacred gear in addition to the irregularities of 9 other smaller souls in your body. The only explanation I can think of at the moment is that you were able to carry out such an act because of one of those souls in your body. Well, Naruto thought, a little dejectedly, I suppose I can't keep this secret either, can I? The only thing that he could likely keep to himself would be that they talk and have personalities of their own. How could he keep that a secret when Hayate had him dead to rights with that damned scared gear of his? Must be because my reserves aren't under the effect of a boost from Diedrich, he thought absently as his guest examined him. The blonde sighed in resignation and went through the same process to call up a bond as he had done yesterday, but this time, instead of having to dig deep into himself, he felt a different response. As if a switch went off in his head, he felt a connection to Shukaku immediately. Just like before, he could feel his magic signature change in a manner like it had the night before, and he flared his magical aura slightly so that it covered his body again, only to feel a larger drain on his reserves as a result. As he gazed at Naruto and examined his somewhat glowing form, the yellow-eyed boy remarked, "It's remarkable that not only has your magic changed color, but it also feels much more in tune with the magic sample I picked up from the sand. I can also see a connection has been formed between the brown soul and your own," he said, moving his eyes slightly. "It seems to adapt your magic signature toward a range of elements, making them easier to use." Gazing at the boy, Naruto said, "Geez, that eye ability of yours is really freaky, man." His fellow teen could only give him a deadpan look. "It may seem freaky to you, but it's actually pretty normal to me," he said. "And if we were to discuss eye color, I think we might want to begin with your odd shift from blue to a pattern I think I've only seen in paintings." He reached into his coat pocket, took out a small case, and opened it to reveal a rectangular mirror, which he held up to his fellow teenager's eyes so he could see it. Naruto quickly thought, so this is what Donaseek meant when he said my eyes changed colors last night, as he gazed at the strange looking eyes he saw in his reflection. The pupil of his eye took on an intriguing appearance, but the majority of it was gold, with a giant black four-pointed star in the center, surrounded by 4 tiny black dots spaced out so that the star looked rather intimidating. Shukaku said, "Hey, what's going on, Naruto? I thought you weren't going to talk to us till tonight and now you're using my abilities again," before he had a chance to think about it any longer. Naruto felt the creature pout over the bond, but he soon moved past it. "So who are we fighting, huh? You didn't even ask this time. Tell me, please, that it's the strange child who keeps staring at you with glowing eyes. It appears that the man needs a solid blow to the face." Shukaku. He tried, but was ignored. Shukaku. He tried again, but got the same result. "Shukaku," he shouted, getting the voice to stop. "We are going to talk later, but for now just go back to what you were doing before." The blonde moaned and palmed his face in frustration as he listened to the equally insane being's ramblings and felt the person sitting next to him turn quizzical. "I need to show someone something, and to do it I needed to use your power. I apologize." After a long period of silence, the creature whimpered a little and exclaimed, "Oh man, all right. We should talk tonight, but I'll return to my previous activities. Naruto later." "Sorry about that," he said wearily, his voice displaying the familiar fatigue he had felt this morning. "When I use this ability I form a connection that allows the souls to talk with me, and the soul I'm currently connected with is one that has the tendency to act like a raving lunatic from time to time." The teen with the spiky hair sighed with relief and turned back to face Hayate. Rather, the boy with brown hair simply reclined on the bench. "I should have known better. That also explains the voices you hear in your head from childhood and your case of schizophrenia. You must be fun at parties if you can literally pull someone's medical information out of your ass," the blonde said, sounding almost bored. "Or, let me guess, is the ability to pull up a person's private documents just one of the leeway things your agency gets?" Naruto didn't even bother to be surprised this time. Hayate said plainly, "The latter, I'm sure you understand." "Totally. So can I turn this off now, or do I need to keep showcasing it to you?" Was the straightforward statement that was intended to highlight how uncomfortable he was with it, but the agent chose to ignore it. The blonde let his connection to Shukaku slip and felt his magic return to normal, hoping his eyes had as well, and if not, the agent didn't bother to comment. "Yes, you may shut your ability off. I've seen all I need. Are you finished asking questions now, and may I begin?" "I'm sorry, but I have one more thing I need to ask before you can have your answers," said Hayate, lightly, lifting the glasses to his face, inspecting them, then turning them around and putting them back in front of his eyes, letting the glow go out again. "Do you know why the fallen angel, Donasek, I think you said his name was, turned to ash?" he asked, taking a cloth from his pants pocket and rubbing his glasses. "He talked about a coup to overthrow some guy named Azazel," Naruto remarked bitterly, recalling the words clearly. "Said they were collecting gear to help their coup succeed under the orders of some guy he didn't name." The psychopath also expressed his sadness at not being able to witness the war, and as he began to burn, he said that his employer had included a backup plan in case he lost. It seems that he had to burn as a failsafe. As Hayate concluded his notes, he thought, "Someone within Grigori is planning to overthrow Azazel, and if this is the direction we're going, it looks like things might get worse than we anticipated. This information is sufficient," he said, turning to Naruto and giving him a full head nod. "I'll need to inform the director of this when I return to command." "That's good because I need answers to some of my own questions. What on earth is happening in this town? Running around stealing weapons from people's souls or fallen angels? That the supposed biblical god created weapons that could kill a god in the first place, and since Diedrich said the former lived nearby, I can only assume that regular angels and devils are real if the big guy upstairs and fallen angels are real. What on earth is happening?" For what seemed like the 100th time that day, Hayate sighed, sat up straight, and turned his entire body to face his questioner. His posture showed no signs of weakness, and his eyes had turned stern. "Naruto Tachibana, the world you have been dragged into is not for the faint of heart. The supernatural world will surprise you at every turn, despite the fact that it may seem kinder than it actually is. Even though you may not agree with what you hear, you cannot go back to your former life now, whether you want to or not. You can try anything you want, but you won't be able to see the world through the same rose-colored lenses as everyone else. You have only glimpsed a small part of the world's reality by looking past the illusion. Let me also tell you something about the truth. The truth is not always what we want it to be. When he had to wait, he was accustomed to waiting quietly. The fact that he was able to be calm, courteous, and patient in a variety of situations was actually one of the many positive traits his parents saw in the child they had raised. Even though he wasn't the fastest learner, he was a good student who could still outperform the other students in his class after some practice. He could have been one of those idealized guys that girls read about in the shoujo manga he had seen some of his female classmates read if he had actually participated in sports. Naruto gave himself a small snort. No, the Prince of Kuo Academy, Yuto Kiba would have been the ideal candidate if anyone had fit that description. Even though his grades weren't as good as Naruto's, he typically achieved very high scores. Even though he didn't play sports, he excelled in gym class and demonstrated that he could have done them with ease if he had tried. Nobody was put off by the fact that he had been a member of a club that basically studied the paranormal, though that may have more to do with the other members than with what they did. No, none of that had mattered to the majority of the schoolgirls. As the teenage hottie or something, it seems he could do no wrong. It seems that boys with boyish good looks and extremely courteous dispositions were attractive to girls. Who could have known? Particularly when he was younger, Naruto could not have accomplished what Yuto did. He was always bursting with energy when he was younger, and no one could ever get him to stop. He was so jittery that Irina and Issei could hardly keep up with him during their time together. His hyperactivity even made it difficult for his parents to get him to sit still at times. His parents had wanted him to study, but he had always needed to be doing something, not initially. After receiving a diagnosis of acute schizophrenia and beginning to take the prescribed medication, everything changed. He lost most of the extra energy he had been holding inside after that and started to slow down a little. After some time, he was nearly what most people would consider a typical child, though his mother did note that he was occasionally a bit too moody and stubborn. Eventually, the moodiness that had been a side effect of the medication had disappeared. At first, it was awful for him. He recalled being irritated as a child because his parents had forced him to sit and study after his once limitless energy had vanished. His parents took time out of their schedules to help him, even though it had never been his strong suit as a child. Even though it never really worked out as planned, they tried to make it enjoyable for him and assisted him in coming up with inventive ways to do it. He believed he could handle anything because he had two major issues as a child. He was learning more easily and was at ease. He discovered that he was capable of handling his issues with ease. Until tonight, it appeared. He was restless for the first time in a long time. Usually, he would have simply put it down to his anxiety about the conversation he is expected to have tonight and the voices in his head. To others, that might have sounded strange, but it was the reality. He would be anxious, of course. After all, he was going to meet a group that had been a major source of stress for him throughout his life. It's safe to assume that he simply wanted to find out what had been happening because meeting someone like that would likely make someone antsy as well. The fact that his friend had passed away the day before and that everyone else was now essentially aware of it could also be the cause of his level of anxiety. Both his father and mother were waiting for him when he arrived home from the park. While his father had simply gazed at him with a dejected expression, his mother was crying. He didn't realize that his father had just come to pat him on the back and that his mother was crying in concern for him until she had come up and given him a hug. It seems that Issei's parents had to tell them what had happened. It wasn't that far of a stretch that they had discovered it, since Issei had only lived a block away from him. It appears that the school had also informed his parents about what had happened at the ceremony. Although he didn't really blame them for it, he felt that the punishment was a bit harsh because he reportedly struck a girl in the face, cut off the remainder of the school day, and left during a school assembly. He was suspended for approximately a month and had to complete schoolwork every week. And they weren't upset with him for what he did, even though these things would make any other parent go crazy. They only wanted to make sure he was alright, regardless of whether it was right or wrong. However, he was not uncomfortable because of his friend's death, which had been on his mind ever since it had occurred last night. His current troubles were less about sadness and more about feeling like he had a lot of energy flowing through him. He felt like a child again, as if he could bounce off the walls at any moment if he could get away with it. His childhood energy levels had returned, and he was unsure of how to deal with it or what to do about it. He literally became more lethargic as a side effect of his medication. The average person would usually feel more exhausted as a result. But for him, it only gave him the same level of energy as someone his age. Nor had there been any issue with that. When they hung out and became exhausted together, Issei was finally able to keep up with him. It had been a somewhat welcome change, if anything. Now, however, it was nearly excruciating to a mind that had not been accustomed to it for so long. In frustration, he started tapping his foot against the floor out of instinct. While he waited, he needed to do something. Something to soothe him. He chose to use the card in his hand as a focal point because he needed something to concentrate on. It was a plain white business card with just 2 sets of information on it, in contrast to others who attempted to adorn their cards with vivid, eye-catching colors. The teen he had met today was named in the first piece. The name of Hayate Fujihara was displayed on the white strip in simple, bold letters. His personal phone number appeared beneath it. When he had made up his mind, he was to call that number. Option. To a fault, the idea was rather straightforward. Like those choose your own adventure books, it represented the freedom to choose one's own route and tell one's own tale. It was meant to be the choices you could make in any circumstance and live your life as you saw fit. He was raised with the belief that he always had a choice, too, thanks to his parents. However, what everyone seemed to overlook about decisions is that every action had both a positive and negative response. Whether they were aware of it or not, a person's decisions not only impacted their own path but also the paths of others. It was comparable to a man choosing one day to skip work at the office. It was acceptable that he chose how to spend his time. He had, however, imposed a new set of options and possibilities on another group of people. those who depended on him to complete his work, and these were not particularly advantageous options for any of the parties. The decision he would have to make was no exception. He could, on the one hand, go it alone. He could try to learn his new skills on his own. He could create his own narrative as he went along and would not be constrained by other people's rules. Finding supporters or allies to help him achieve his goals may be challenging, but he would still be able to retain some degree of independence. He could, however, choose the alternative. He might develop into an agent of your organization, Naruto asked, leaning back on the bench. For him, today had been nothing but setbacks. He had naturally wanted to know what kind of world he had ended up in, but this was simply terrible news on so many levels that he could hardly count them. It seemed that he had entered a new world where supernatural people were completely crazy. Yes, the glasses. Wearing teenager said calmly as he scribbled neatly in his notebook while staring blankly into it. I believe that someone like you would make a very good agent. The irritated blonde yelled, we just met not even 30 minutes ago. How would you know I would fit in with this secret occult Super Sentai type club? With a thin eyebrow raised, Hayate looked at his whiskered companion and paused writing in his notebook. Naruto felt as though he was being stared at as if he were a moron. The agent sighed as he saw the blonde abruptly scratch his cheek in embarrassment. Did you just compare an organization of trained agents to a children's TV show? He asked. You do realize that I've read your file, right? It has grades, personality profile, general habits, physical body proportions including height, weight, genital size. Okay, Naruto yelled as he swiftly covered Hayate's mouth with his hand. Have you guys ever heard of privacy? How do you know all of this stuff? If you guys are a government group, then doesn't that mean you guys have limits to what you can do or something? Naruto's hand was taken away from his face by the boy with the brown hair. I said we were formed by the United Nations, he said, his features marred by a frown. As for how we got the information, well, that's classified unless you join. Naruto encircled himself with his arms and started complaining. He gritted his teeth and said, of course it's classified, before moving on. Besides, even if you know that, you still even answered why you believe I could join up. What makes you think your organization will even accept me? I'm just some guy who just found out he can use magic and has gauntlet that is pretty rare. Hayate took out a white cloth from a pocket in his coat. The brown-haired boy said bluntly, you're really underestimating the ability of boosted gear, as he removed his glasses and cleaned them while keeping his eyes closed. Imagine, if you will, it being in the hands of someone who, much like yourself, is determined. That gauntlet has the ability to, as I'm sure you're already aware, square the magical power and physical ability a wielder every 10 seconds. It does this until the user is left with little to no stamina to continue boosting. After cleaning the lenses, the boy with the brown hair put the cloth back in his pocket and moved his glasses back into their correct position. Now imagine, he continued, that a person with incredible physical endurance comes along and manages to receive the ability of the Red Dragon Emperor. They gain the ability to square their own power. What do you think happens, Tachibana? The blonde immediately responded, they get a lot stronger, not understanding his fellow teen's direction. The boy with short hair shook his head. He looked directly at Naruto, his yellow eyes staring into his own blue, and said, yes, but it seems like you're underestimating the value. When the organization was first looking at you, we found you to be a very good prospect to join up. However, now that the legendary abilities of the Red Dragon Emperor are in your possession, your potential strength has shot through the roof, and in all honesty, I myself am not sure where it falls now. The only thing I can surely say is that with enough training and practice, you have the potential to be one of the strongest humans in recorded history. That in itself is not something anyone can say. The blonde stared at his hands in disbelief. Could he have been that powerful? The offer appeared too good to be true. The blonde glanced at his contact after pausing briefly. Wait a second, you said that Diedrich and Boosted Gear gave their users the ability to kill gods, right? Then how many have the previous users of this thing killed? Hayate's final response was blunt. As of right now, no user of the Boosted Gear has killed a god. The teen with the whiskers gave him an increasingly annoyed look. Then how do you know this thing has the potential to kill a damned god? Because Longinus gears are special even amongst sacred gears. Outside the fact that only one of each of them exists, they do the impossible. They combine aspects of abilities that should for all intents and purposes be impossible to perform. As a result, each gear of the Longinus class have theoretically enough power and bizarreness to their abilities that the slaying of a deity should be possible. The only reasons most Longinus class gear users have never killed gods before, though, is mostly due to... Wait, the blonde said, his eyes deadpanned, interrupting Hayate. Don't tell me. The others got arrogant and or power drunk because some moron told them their gear had the ability to kill a god, thus they decided to forego training and got themselves killed by gods and other beings for even trying without forethought. That's actually the basic gist of what we've actually managed to get on record from various sources. Were the reports wrong in suggesting you had no previous involvement with the supernatural? Naruto rolled his eyes and said, "Just a lucky guess," in response. So in other words, it doesn't give someone the ability to kill a god right away and you got to work for your strength still lest someone end up like previous idiots going into battle. Got it? You still haven't answered why you think I would be good despite all of this stuff. Just having the gauntlet and magical ability can't make you a good candidate, can it? Hayate looked at him coolly. The agent leaned even more back against the bench in a more relaxed position and, for the first time since Naruto had met him, he almost had a melancholy expression under his still stern face. While these things are useful and your personality profile fits closely with what we look for in an agent, that isn't what makes me think you'd be a good match. An important person to me once told me something that he believed made a great agent. I think if he ever met you he would see that description fit you perfectly. What did he say? A good agent doesn't need to be incredibly skilled or the smartest person in the world. A good agent is just someone who has. As he recalled what his fellow human had said, the blonde repeated, the desire to protect those closest to them, and those that they'll never meet. Now that he thinks about it, Hayate gave him options, but ultimately he still felt somewhat stuck. The brown-haired boy was purposefully betting on this value that he felt defined him, so he told him what he had today. He concluded that he didn't like his fellow teen at the time, but was the brown-haired agent, really? At first, he was unable to understand the brown-haired boy's meaning. He certainly wanted to keep his friends and family safe, but would he really try to sacrifice himself for the sake of strangers he had never met and would never meet again? He probably wouldn't know himself if he were to ask himself this question. The voice he recognized as harsh and cruel sounded guttural, almost as if he was actually attempting to define it. "It is almost surprising for me to hear you say that," he said. The voice paused, almost in contemplation, before continuing, "In all honesty, if I didn't know any better, I would have said that this was all one big trick. Then again, I guess you are a different person. Definitely smarter than before, that is for sure." Naruto wasn't sure if he should be offended or just irritated at the time. Was he being called stupid by this thing? He may have acknowledged his ignorance as a child, but he put a lot of effort into achieving his goals and grades. There was no doubt that he was a born genius who took in knowledge. When he was younger, his mother forced him to study every day, and eventually it just seemed natural. Naruto yelled in his head, "Oh yeah, well go fuck yourself," and then let out a small moan. His mother would have cleaned his mouth with soap if she had heard it now. He was unwilling to repeat the lesson he had learned as a child. The voice merely laughed. "Well, don't I stand corrected," the voice thought. Prior to asking, Naruto felt his eyes heavy and his mind slow down a little. "It seems that maybe you still do have a chance at having that spark." The voice whispered, "Relax," soothingly. "You'll be able to ask your questions soon enough." Naruto would have reacted, but his body seemed to unwind on its own, moving along the bed as his back brushed the headboard. His head felt lightheaded, and he could faintly hear the long, soft screech of his downward shift on the bed. Just as his head finally touched his pillow, the room started to spin. Prior to everything turning black, the colors appeared to swirl. Then his vision started to fill with new hues and emotions. The whiteness of the surface above him made him feel as though he was looking at something whose conclusion he did not know. He felt as though he was gazing into a void, but it was white, the exact opposite of what a void is meant to be. Because light was trapped and unable to escape in voids, voids were the absence of light. However, here. The voice asked snootily from the side, "Are you done staring at the white ceiling and pondering the meaning of life or whatever it is you humans do?" The moment Naruto glanced at the side, he nearly recoiled in surprise. He had his eyes fixed on a huge orange hand, paw, or whatever it was. It had a thick coat of deep orange fur that extended up its arm. The fact that the paw was large enough to crush him and then some if it so desired was frightening, though. To be honest, he dreaded looking up because he knew the creature sitting upright would most likely be much taller than him. In the end, he looked up anyhow. The face of a giant fox with eyes the size of an average person and a deep red, silted complexion was staring down at him. Its fur was dark orange, just like the rest of its body. Black fur surrounded its eyes and extended into its ears, adding an intriguing contrast to the features. Overall, without it, he would appear extremely menacing. "Bunny ears," Naruto said absently out loud. For a minute, there was no sound in the room, but the young blonde was certain he saw a twitch in the enormous creature's eyes. Naruto was launched into the air when it suddenly raised its paw and smashed it into the ground. If Naruto hadn't been nearly painfully caught in the creature's free paw and lifted until his entire face was level with the pupil of its bloodshot right eye, he would have screamed. The creature yelled, "Did you just say my ears were those of an infernal rabbit's?" Naruto recognized the harsh, deep, guttural voice, but this time it seemed to be dealing with him in a more humorous way. Instead of experiencing the fear that most sensible people would have advised him to, he felt more confident at the time and kept talking non-stop. Naruto yelled back, "You heard me, or are those giant ears of yours just for show?" as he fixed the beast with his gaze. In the beast's grasp, Naruto inhaled deeply before shouting, "Your ears look like they belong on a rabbit. I mean, I would hope with those giant floppy things would actually be able to hear something, but apparently that was an assumption on my part. My bad. Let me speak up for you." The fox glared at something out of the corner of its eye before it could respond, and laughter of all kinds reverberated throughout the room. However, Naruto was able to identify them as the voices that had been communicating with him for so long. Additionally, he could hear D-Drake's laughter mixed in, indicating that the dragon was also present. However, the voice of the person who had assumed the shape of the spear was clearly heard laughing. "Huh, he's got your number now, doesn't he, you damned fox?" His laugh-filled voice yelled. He felt as though someone was watching him intently. "Nice one, Naruto." The fox beast yelled, "Well, if you like it, why don't you hold Naruto then?" as it raised the arm holding Naruto back. The boy moaned as he realized what was going to happen to him. He was correct because he was propelled forward in a throwing motion and in the direction of the quickly approaching face of what appeared to be a raccoon head covered in sand with golden eyes and a crossed pupil, just like his eyes had appeared when he had used the creature's abilities. Unfortunately, it was not nearly as soft as sand when he struck it in the forehead. The sandy raccoon creature appeared to be sent reeling backwards in slight pain as he struck with a brief, painful groan. Fortunately, one of the creature's paws caught him before he could fall and held him up to its face. The creature's golden-stared eyes were mischievous, and a grin spread across his maw. The raccoon grinned and said, "Hey, Naruto," but that wasn't the correct term to describe Shukaku's shape. The raccoon, possibly Tanuki, brought him closer to its mouth and attempted to whisper, "Ignore the fox. He's just a pain in the ass anyway. I think he's just jealous that we kicked ass last night and he didn't. He's a sore loser like that." The orange-furred fox roared back, "I can hear you, you blasted Tanuki," and Naruto turned to see it glaring at the person holding him. Besides, of course, he would need the weakest of us. If he had used someone like me, it would have ended up being too easy a fight. Shukaku roared, and Naruto felt his palm shake with anger. The Tanuki replied, "You want to go Kurama," before becoming a little more lighthearted. "I mean, could someone with rabbit ears really put up that much of a fight?" Shukaku started to march toward them, and the newly named Kurama roared at it. To be honest, Naruto believed that the two creatures would actually fight. He could tell they had a lot of arguments just by observing this brief exchange between them. Though he was unable to determine whether the insults were the result of genuine hatred or merely lighthearted infighting, he could see it clearly enough. As a strong stream of orange fire flowed through the open area, preventing Kurama from even approaching Shukaku, he would remain unable to determine whether or not that was the case. Naruto believed that he would perspire because it was so strong and he could feel the extreme heat. "Enough!" The D-Drake's well-known voice boomed from the side, making Naruto turn around and notice something he had only ever seen in children's storybooks. Although he had been told that D-Drake was an ancient dragon, he had to see it for himself. His towering scaled form was slightly more menacing than that of Tanuki and the monster fox, but he was about the same size as Kurama and Shukaku. He could compare the two, if anything, to enormous plush toys. The two glowing green orbs he called eyes were his most prominent feature, the scales covering his body that were almost crimson red. It would have been a frightening sight to a lesser being. "You want to go too, you big old pile of scales," Tanuki retorted, turning both his body and Naruto away from his prior target. "You think you're so high and mighty, right, because you got the power to double your strength? Please, you wouldn't stand a chance where we come from. The humans there would have laughed at you, or sealed your scaled ass like they did the rest of us." The dragon was glowing at Naruto. Says the Tanuki, who currently has very little strength of his own. Sweating uncontrollably, the blonde saw three tall creatures arguing like kids with one another. When he considered it, it was rather pitiful. He couldn't resist scowling to himself. Right now, most people would be afraid of anything like him. Rather, he was handling it as though it were a common occurrence. He was simply accustomed to hearing their voices in his mind, so that couldn't be the reason. He was undoubtedly accustomed to that, but he was unaware of their previous appearance. Even though they were being a little goofy, it should have startled or even frightened him. There was something really wrong with this. He would characterize it as familiar, even nostalgic, if he had to assign a feeling to it. "Hey guys, stop fighting," a shy voice called out from behind them. "I thought we agreed that you would stay calm when we revealed ourselves to Naruto." Turning on Shukaku's hand, Naruto saw the other 6 creatures in the room that he had apparently overlooked. Like the 3 he had just met, they were peculiar beings in their own right. A cat-like creature was to Shukaku's right. It was peculiar because blue fire was all over it. If its nearly fanged smile was any indication, it was looking at him with a kind of amusement through its heterochromia eyes, one of which was yellow and the other green. 2 long blue tails, thick with roaring flame, swung behind it. There was a big creature that resembled a turtle next to the flaming cat. Since it was a hybrid of several species, it resembled a turtle. It had 3 shrimp-like tails, a crab-like shell, and spikes all over its body, giving it the appearance of a large turtle. Red, muscle-like tissue was also clearly visible beneath its shell and around its crimson eye. It lacks hind legs but has a pair of hands and arms that resemble those of a human. Along with its large forehead, which also has horns, its rather large lower jaw has horns that resemble teeth, giving the impression that the rest of the face is inside the mouth. With almost undetectable anxiety, its red eyes gazed at him. There was a green-skinned, red-furred monkey with a gorilla-like body on the turtle's right. It has 2 long horns that curve upward on its forehead like a crown, both of which are black-tipped, elongated blunt fangs, spiked-like protrusions along the length of its tails, and eyes with white pupils and yellow irises. To be honest, the blonde thought the creature appeared almost bored. There was another odd creature to the great ape's right. It looked mostly like a white horse with a dolphin's head. In front, it had 3 shorter horns and 2 long, pointed horns. It had 5 large tails and light brown hoofs and horn tips. Its dark blue-green eyes were also marked in red. The beast was rather motionless, looking directly at him as if it were passing judgment. The dolphin horse was followed by a big white slug with a hint of blue. Not only did it have short arms, but it also had short legs. It also featured a mouth with hole-like openings and 2 conspicuous optical tentacles for eyes. It appeared to have a slimy substance all over its body. At the moment, it was sitting down and leaning back on its 6 long tails. A blue, armored rhinoceros beetle was nearby, its green tail sticking out from its thorax and the shell currently enclosing its wings. Its 2-sectioned horn and helmet-like skull appeared to cover its eyes. Through the visor where its eyes were, an orange light glowed. It had 2 pincers on its face around the exposed portion of the helmet, which typically covered a mouth full of sharp teeth. It also has 3 blue armored legs on each side, a row of slits on each shoulder, and spike protrusions on its shoulders. Finally, a creature that should have been impossible to miss appeared at the giant fox's left. It was an enormous Oni, a type of creature that is usually portrayed with the heads of cows. Considering that it was basically a cross between an octopus and a bull, this one was pretty intriguing. It had a muscular, hunched-over body with 8 tentacle-like legs that resembled cephalopods. It also had big hands and long, muscular arms. It had 4 horns on its head, all of which were broken in different places. It had a smile on its face as it gazed at him. His rough voice reverberated throughout the room as the giant ape erupted in laughter. "I don't think those 2 know how not to fight in the first place," he said. "Add that prideful dragon to the mix and they make quite the threesome." The fox monster turned away from Diedrich and no longer looked at the other people. "Oh, shut up, you good-for-nothing ape," it said back. The ape growled and appeared ready to join the argument, saying, "If I remember, as such pride seems to be one of your major flaws as well, so you have no right to talk." The enormous beetle from his section of the room chirped, "Can everyone just chill please," in a tone that seemed lighthearted and amiable. A plus in Naruto's opinion was that it was able to prevent everyone from fighting again. It's the first time we've actually seen Naruto in a while, and it wouldn't be lucky if he began to think of us as troublesome, you know. The flaming cat, now perched on its haunches, said, "I must agree," in a voice that reverberated throughout the room and reminded the blonde of the seductive voice that occasionally spoke to him. She turned to face the young blonde and said, "Surely we do not wish to make Naruto think less of us, and your infighting isn't going to help. I apologize for the squabbles of my siblings. It has just been some time since we've actually had company with us. Outside of the dragon that forced himself on you, it has been some time since we've had guests in here. I'm sure you understand." As it glared hotly at the flaming cat, the red Welsh growled, "Oi, who forced himself on who? Pay attention. As the Red Dragon Emperor, I am among the most powerful creatures on the planet. The blonde is fortunate to have someone as amazing as me." If the monster fox hadn't snorted, Naruto would have said something. It said dryly, "Oh really, with a sarcastic undertone and a smile that spread to the beast's maw. If you're so strong, then how did you get sealed, huh? The Ushi. Oni beside the fox used one of its enormous, muscular arms to slap it on the back of the head. Oh, don't start with him, it said, glaring down at its counterpart with 9 tails. The rest of us were as strong as he was raw power-wise at one point, and look what happened to us. We've not only been sealed, but we've been weakened as well now. It exhaled. It seems to me like we keep hitting low after low at this point. The blonde didn't know what they were discussing, but he also wasn't going to inquire. He chose to try to shift the topic instead. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him as he said, "Hey everyone," grabbing their attention. He moved his foot a little uncomfortably in Shukaku's hand. "Look, don't mind me, but I'm kind of clueless over here, like about everything. If one of you could start helping me make sense of this stuff, that would really help." One dragon and 9 different sized beasts exchanged glances before turning back to face him. At that point, the dragon seemed to decide to express his opinions. He said, "I must apologize for this, partner," with some sincerity. Sharing a host with, well, anything else, is not something I'm used to. I've never dealt with other beings on a partnership level before, aside from my usual users of sacred gear. Naruto thought about what the dragon had said. Could he really blame the dragon for having a little more difficulty with this if he was that alone? Most likely not, but that didn't mean he couldn't have tried to act a little more responsibly, and who was he to pass judgment? He waved off the dragon's apology while nodding to himself. "It's fine, Diedrich," Naruto reassured him, offering a tiny gesture of appeasement. He turned to face the other people in the room and said, "Don't worry about it. I understand." Suddenly, he realized why he had come. The other beasts exchanged a few glances, as if they were having a private discussion. "Before we get to anything else, I would like the rest of you to introduce yourselves to me so we can talk on a better level. Right now I only know the name of Shukaku, the one whose hand I happen to be sitting on. I would like to know the rest of your names if at all possible." Finally, the flaming cat emerged first. "Greetings," she said in a courteous manner. "I am called Matabi. I also hold the title of the 2 tails." The turtle creature followed her. If his one open eye looking from side to side across the room meant anything, he appeared a little anxious. When his lone gaze finally returned to Naruto, the beast's jaw lifted slightly in what the blonde assumed was an attempt at a smile. "Hi Naruto," he said in a childlike manner, introducing himself as the person who had kindly begged Naruto on multiple occasions. "My name is Isobu and they call me the 3 tails." The ape's next words were anything but kind, in contrast to those of his fellows. As it struck a small arm pose, the giant ape blusterily said, "Listen up kid, because I'm only going to repeat my name once, so pay attention." In an effort to appear cool, he started tossing his arms around in a variety of absurd positions. "I am the handsome monkey king of the water screen cave. The king of the sage monkeys, bestowed with the Dharma name of Sun by the sage of the 6 paths himself. I am Son Goku, the great sage equaling heaven Huhuhu." The dolphin horse beside the monkey pawned its hoof to its face and stared directly into Naruto's eyes as the monkey started laughing merrily to itself, causing the blonde to start perspiring. He kindly said, "Please ignore this idiot next to me," ignoring the sounds of its siblings' outrage. "My name is Kakuo and, as you can see with my appearance, I am a dolphin horse with 5 tails. It is a pleasure, I'm sure." Then the slug-like creature appeared, his eye tubes glimmering with excitement. The best said, "Nice to see you again," with its mouth holes moving a little. "The name is Seiken and I am the 6 tails. Let's get along, okay?" When it was its turn, the giant beetle also appeared to be in a very good mood. Its back shell opened, revealing 6 wings that spread out and started flapping rapidly through the air. It hovered for a while before ascending through the air with numerous twists and turns. It flew over Naruto's head and up toward the ceiling, leaving trails of yellow dust behind its green wings. Naruto was unable to avoid being perplexed. Since when does introducing yourself involve flying up into the air and doing tricks? The golden eye beside him looked at him for a brief moment before adopting an almost amused expression. "Just wait for it," the Tonki said with a hint of delight. At last, the beetle appeared to use its dust to spell something while dancing in the air. The beast rode in the air while Naruto read it out loud. Introducing the super fantastic beetle who holds the title of Lucky Number 7, Chome. He finished reading it and turned to see the newly acquired Chome hovering over him and Shukaku, seemingly awaiting his approval. The situation made the blonde laugh and shake his head. When he finally said, "It's nice to meet you too, Chome," the 7-tailed beast happily returned to its original location on the ground, taking it as a compliment. With a raised eyebrow, Naruto turned to face the Ushi. "Oni. So that's 2 who have given me a real showstopper. Are you going to break out into some song and dance or something?" The beast merely gazed at him before letting out a sigh. If B had actually rubbed off on me as much as he thought, then maybe, but no, just no, it replied. He pointed to the fox beside him and said, quite frankly, I don't even know how Sun and Shomei got so eccentric in the first place. Personally, I blame him, which caused the beast to glare at him. How is it my fault that those two nitwits are so inane? He snarled from his position. Of course, the octopus-like creature shot back, because of you and your superiority complex. Please, they were like that when we were babes as well, it retorted passionately. They were always asinine. I refuse to take the blame for this. The Ushi. Oni snorted, whatever, then looked back at the blonde with a tiny smile on its enormous lips. He gently nudged the fox beside him and said, I'm Gyuki and I go by the Eight Tails formally. You're next. The fox remained motionless, which seemed to greatly annoy him. Listen here, you massive sack of fur. Get your butt up now and introduce yourself to him. As it gazed at the teen with the whiskers, the fox glared back at its eight-tailed colleague before letting out a sigh and accepting its fate. There seemed to be something in the fox's eyes, Naruto thought. Staring into the ominous-looking red eyes at first gave the impression that they were there by design. He noticed sadness and perhaps even a glimmer of regret for what had transpired when he looked more closely. Why did it look at him with sadness? Did it regret making him believe he was insane, or did it regret not telling him the truth? When he gave it some thought, he wasn't really sure how to handle the fox's grief. In any case, he would most likely learn about it eventually. The sadness that had previously been there abruptly vanished behind eyes that soon became humorous. A smile swiftly spread across the creature's face, and to be honest, he would have assumed it was pure evil or something if it weren't for a tiny buzzing in the back of his mind that told him otherwise. It had the smile of a sentient, evil creature you might see in one of those children's anime shows. Brat, it said. My name is Kurama and I'm the nine-tailed fox. You better remember my name, kid. Without thinking, Naruto questioned, are you a tsundere? Before covering his mouth with his hand. He saw the fox's eyebrows flicker in irritation and heard laughter throughout the room. First he pokes fun at my ears, and now he pokes fun at my personality, the fox muttered, his incredulity evident. Naruto was certain that Kurama, in an anime, would have been the one who, when angry, drew lines on the ground in the corner. Naruto glanced at Shukaku, and the tanuki read it with ease. As he laughed, the beast threw Naruto at Kurama's back, letting the blonde with the whiskers land on the fox's velvety coat. Naruto got to his feet and cautiously ascended the fox's back before reaching Kurama's head and starting to scratch him behind the ears. Cheer up, buddy, he said, laughing as the fox began to rumble softly, indicating that he was enjoying the scratch on his ear. Under Naruto's menstruation, the orange fox growled, don't you dare try to patronize me, Naruto, as his brethren and Diedrich laughed at his pathetic attempts to fend off the scratching. On the outside, the blonde was smiling, but on the inside, he was completely baffled by what had happened. He had arrived here prepared to fire at the top of his hat if necessary to obtain answers, but as the initial discussion progressed, he felt his rage subside. He felt as though he was in a situation that was very familiar to him, but he still had questions that needed to be answered. Being with them right now and smiling with them felt familiar to him despite everything he had experienced in the previous day. It brought him joy. With his hand still reaching out and scratching the creature's enormous ear, the blonde advanced farther along the fox beast's head toward the very edge close to his face. He regarded every creature in the room as if they were himself. A few of them had on smiles, or what he thought were smiles. Others, such as Shukaku and Diedrich, were blatantly smiling at the prospect of having leverage against the fox in their apparent new rivalry. Sitting on top of Kurama's furred head, Naruto had to suppress a laugh when he heard Kurama moan contentedly beneath him. Everyone's focus shifted to the whiskered teen when he cleared his throat. I was hoping that you guys would be willing to talk to me about how you all are here. How are you all here? I know how Diedrich is here because I put his gauntlet on, but the rest of you, I have no idea why you're here or why you've been making me feel crazy when I was a kid. Well, now that we got introductions out of the way and Kurama seems to be enjoying himself, the blonde said as he watched the beast raise one of his enormous hands and give him the finger. Son Goku asked, perplexed, what are you talking about when you said we were making you feel crazy? We were just trying to talk to you, kid. We weren't trying to make you feel crazy. We were just trying to get you to acknowledge our existence instead of just calling us voices in your head. Really? The blonde questioned in a defiant manner. Well then, what about the other day when you were talking about some dream I used to have or something? What was that about? Matabi explained. Oh, that. And then she and her fellow brethren glared at a Shukaku, drawing Naruto's attention to him as well. From the looks of things, said Tomki was trying to whistle while turning her head away from the main group. Well, someone, and I'm not naming names, decided that it would be a good idea to pull a prank that day. And that someone proceeded to sound like a malicious madman while the rest of us were trying to tell you that you had a dream. If it makes you feel any better that someone, that is to say the one who did it, got the sand beaten out of him after the fact and will get something much worse should he ever do it again. Shukaku appeared to be about to say something, but Matabi's clawed paw slapped the back of his head, making him groaning in agony. From the side, Yuki said, aside from Kid, we never tried to say anything mean to you. If you remember, every time we've talked to you we have never said anything cruel, have we? The teenager with the blonde hair wanted to protest, but he considered what the Ushi-Oni had said and recalled the incident. They had never said anything illogical or intended to harm him until the other day. The most they had ever done, as far as he could recall, was comment on what he had been doing or seeing at the time. They also made an effort to keep him away from potentially harmful activities. They had never done or said anything to hurt him, and perhaps Issei would still be okay if he had paid attention to them the other day. He couldn't have known, sorry. As a child, his parents and doctors had warned him not to pay attention to the voices in his head. Although he may have thought that before what he had witnessed, they were meant to be figments of his imagination. They were not supposed to be able to kill you or give you the magical ability to battle one of the biblical gods' disobedient children. Damn it, that's simply not how the illusions operated. The blonde noticed that he was getting upset and tried to stop his thoughts before he started crying or something. Now he had to be strong. He needed answers to his questions, and he needed stability. Before he knew it, he felt something brush against his cheek and saw Kurama's enormous clawed digits carefully wiping a trail of tears from his cheek. One of Kurama's enormous red eyes was staring up at him with a nearly spoken expression. The fox calmly said, Kid, I'm sorry about what happened, with a trace of sadness concealed in his rich baritone. He was your friend and, even for a pervert, deserved better than what he got. Unfortunately, this is what happened and you have to live with it. But just know that no matter what happens, we're here for you, because even if you may think otherwise, we are in this together. Kurama's words touched the adolescent. Naruto muttered, thanks I guess, as he became more composed. He believed that he understood what the fox was saying. He had people he could rely on for support, so he wasn't alone in this. As he pondered the big question, he further calmed himself. Just what are you guys? The heavenly dragon from the other side of Kurama finally spoke up after their serious conversation started, saying, I myself am quite curious as well. In my lengthy life, I have heard and seen a lot, but I have never come across this circumstance before. Instead of sacred gears, beasts like you sealed into a human? Given how useful each of your unique skills is, the biblical god would have tried to put at least one of you into a gear given your varying strength levels. The dragon paused as he kept his gaze on the tailed beasts in the room. In addition, I can tell that none of you resemble any animal yokai that I have ever seen or encountered. Despite having different skill sets, your souls are too similar to each other, and your forms are too different. Even your siblings don't claim to have souls like this. You are all anomalies to me, and I won't tolerate any plans you may have for my partner. No, Isobu cried pathetically, a strange sound for a creature of his size. We would never use Naruto for anything like that. He's our friend. We would never try to hurt him. The fact that you would even suggest such a thing offends me, Kakuo said, adding a harsh edge to his typically courteous tone. Yeah, Shomei yelled fiercely, his wings buzzing menacingly behind him. If anything, we should be asking what your plans are for Naruto. You're the new guy here and you could be unlucky, you know? The dragon gave them a frustrated roar. You think I'm a danger? He questioned angrily. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do anything to my partner, so why would I? He now practically serves as my avatar in the real world. Furthermore, even if I wanted to, the biblical god has so many safeguards built into my container that I would most likely be erased entirely. It's not worthwhile. I'll let you know. Naruto abruptly stopped the conversation by yelling, enough, at the top of his lungs. The blonde turned to face the dragon and said, look, it seems like Kurama said we are all in this together. Diedrich, thank you for your concern. I know you're trying to protect me, but I don't think they'll try to do anything to me. And what makes you so sure? Said the new voice in an already sizable cast. I would like to point out where blind trust got you the last time if that is the case. Despite his obvious flinch, Naruto gave a similar response. He paused in contemplation before saying, you're right, but at the same time I just have a feeling that they're good guys, you know. They don't seem like they would do anything to me. Also take into account that they could have if they'd tried. They've been talking to me for years, so they could have done something by now. So please just give them a chance to explain, Diedrich. The dragon silently gazed at his new companion before letting out a loud sigh. All right. Naruto gave him a nod before turning back to face the others. So now that has been dealt with, I'll ask again. Just what are you and how the heck did you guys get inside me? Seiken reluctantly replied, it's not exactly that simple to answer Naruto, with tiny bubbles escaping from his open mouth. I mean, if we told you then you probably wouldn't believe us. Naruto merely gazed at the legless slug. You're telling me that your existence is less believable than the fallen angels because if that's what you're getting at I call bullshit, the blonde said in a deadpan tone that carried a trace of annoyance. At this point I'll believe anything you guys throw at me, so come on lay it on me. Shukaku clapped his two front paws together with joy as he asked, would you believe that we're aliens sent here to destroy the world by a powerful overlord and that you shall be the avatar of Earth's final destruction? Everyone in the room gave his response a wide range of irritated looks, and he started to perspire a little under their stern stares. Their glowers kept piercing him, and he said, Well, he said he would believe anything at this point, so I just wanted to see if it was true. Please don't hurt me. Kurama merely said, Matabi, as the cat nodded and gave Shukaku a hard paw slap across the back of his head, causing him to fall first into the white floor area and curse in agony. Kurama ignored his brother's cries of outrage as he went on, saying, please ignore Shukaku. He was dropped on his head off the side of a mountain as a child. I'm sure you understand. As I'm sure you're already aware, my brother's statement is false and completely asinine, so let's get to the crux of the matter. Naruto, the truth is we are afraid to tell you what we are because it is connected to what you are. The blonde's mouth formed a thin line as he adopted a bewildered expression. He said, you're afraid to tell me what you are because it's connected to what I am. His mind attempted to comprehend the sentence but was unsuccessful. The tailed creatures turned their heads away from him, including Shukaku, who was still lying on the ground. What do I have to do with you besides the obvious? What am I that you're so afraid to tell me? When the blonde glanced down at Kurama's face, she noticed that his expression was also growing a little dejected. Why can't you tell me? What am I to you and you to me? Our friend, Kurama said quietly on behalf of the others and himself, which made the blonde's eyes soften a little and his mounting rage subside. You were our friend, and it's because you were our friend that we're afraid if we tell you the truth that you will be hurt over what happened. With a confused tone, Diedrich questioned, why would he be hurt? What is the connection between my partner and your origins? Matabi interrupted Naruto before he could say anything more. She called out, Naruto, drawing his attention to herself. Do you remember what happened to you when you went to try and fight Rainier? Do you remember what you saw? Naruto nodded, unable to see where the question was going. Yeah, he answered uncertainly. Some girl and I, as a preteen mind you, were talking about something weird. We were talking about my reasons for wanting to be strong and stuff, about me wanting to be top dog in my village or something. I really don't see what she meant when she asked the question, to be honest. She said I was a ninja or something, I think. What does that delusion have to do with anything? Matabi merely gave a headshake. Naruto, what if I told you that was not aberration but a memory? Naruto simply stared in bewilderment at the two-tailed cat creature. I would say you're crazy. The blonde shot back instantly. He grinned to himself, finding it a little amusing given the circumstances. From the sound of things I would have been 12, maybe 13 in that supposed memory, but how could it be true? I can't remember something like that happening, and I certainly don't remember being a ninja. Me, a ninja? Can you believe that I would really be a ninja? As he laughed to himself, the blonde with the whiskers glanced around the room and saw that all of the tailed beasts were still staring at him with dejected expressions. Naruto was a little queasy. He addressed them bluntly, saying, oh come on guys. He looked down at Kurama's head and gave it a soothing scratch, thinking that the fox needed to relax. Now you're just joking, right? How can I be a ninja and why wouldn't I remember any of it? None of you are making any sense, he said. Come on Kurama, tell them to cut out the joke because it isn't funny, you know. Naruto, he attempted. Naruto, there's a reason you don't remember. The blonde abruptly yelled, just stop lying to me you damned bastard, as drops of water struck the red fur he was massaging. You know the reason I don't remember is because it never happened. That has to be right, you know, so don't go lying to me. Naruto, snarled the fox beast. The beast felt some water splash against his fur, but he persisted, saying, just stop. Just freaking stop. We're telling you why we can't tell you, why we're afraid to tell you. Telling you this is hard enough as it is, and you need to accept that it's true. The blonde sobbed, then why can't I remember it, just before it struck him like a train wreck. It became so clear that it sounded absurd in the context. It was a ridiculousness that only bad manga and novels could convey. Are you telling me it's a case of amnesia? Are you stupid? I remember almost everything but the baby years in my life, and you're telling me I for some reason don't remember being a supposed ninja? Shukaku said, that's because it's not your first life, as he lay on the ground. It's your second, not the first. Staring at the still Down Tanuki, Diedrich said, that's impossible. The idea that souls reincarnate was disproved a long time ago. The commodity of the different factions in this world is souls. The flow of the dead can only be controlled by gods who have some domain control over the afterlife. In addition, only the Longinus, Sephiroth Graal user can communicate with deceased people's souls and gain a true understanding of the soul itself. There are only a handful of gods that I can think of that could even give a soul a new vessel, and none of them are nearly kind enough to accomplish that, as far as I can tell. Trust me, if you knew you would say differently, but you're correct when you say it wasn't a reincarnation scenario, Yuki retorted calmly. The point is we are afraid that telling Naruto would make him relive all his previous memories. Remembering them slowly over time is one thing, but experiencing them in one go could be damaging. The mind would have trouble separating which memories are more up to date and which ones are from his past. We are deeply connected with his existence, so finding out about us means finding out about him. Isobu silently apologized. Naruto, I know that this must upset you and we're sorry, but it's to protect you, as he watched the blonde's head drop and his hair covered his eyes. Naruto found it difficult to believe what he was hearing. The blonde had been upset by a lot of things he had heard in the last day. His friend had passed away in a terrible way. A fallen angel wearing a freaking fedora and overcoat attacked him, and by the end of the fight, the guy was dead. After learning from his tearful parents that there were supernatural beings from the many different religions in the world, he was suspended from school for a while for slapping a girl who was making fun of Issei. He was then offered a freaking job as an agent for them. To top it all off, he now discovered that apparently everything he had believed to be true about himself was not. The blonde yelled, "Fucking damn it," and angrily slapped Kurama's back with his hand. He remained silent if the beast had sensed it. The blonde, however, continued to beat away without considering it, his anger never abating. Fucking damn it. After what seemed like minutes, the blonde's energy nearly vanished, and he just passed out, his cries reverberating throughout the room. His cries turned into tiny sobs that were muffled by his face being flung against Kurama's back, and the other residents simply observed the scene with sadness. To them, seeing their friend in such a state had been somewhat heartbreaking. Even Diedrich, who would typically consider such conduct to be unworthy, lacked the courage to express his opinion. Then it simply stopped without warning. It simply stopped after a minute or so, and the room fell silent. They initially believed that he might have dozed off or something, but when the blonde stood quietly, their theory was disproved. His face was still shadowed by his spiked hair, and his cheeks were still marred by new tears. He had his hands clenched into fists. Chomei attempted to say, "Naruto," but was interrupted. "A quiet, just not right now, Chomei," the teenager said. "Just not right now. Can I just get out of here right now? I think I'm going to go for a walk." "Yes," Kurama answered in a similarly quiet voice. "You can go for now. Just close your eyes tight and you'll be able to feel yourself wake up. We'll talk again when you're feeling better." Instead of answering, Naruto followed Kurama's instructions. He firmly closed his eyes and calmed his thoughts, putting his emotions aside for the time being. He felt the world around him change as he focused a little in his relaxed state. The feeling of lightness in the empty white room had vanished. Instead, he felt a little colder now, and as he moved a little, he could feel his desk chair's leather crumpling up. He opened his eyes, glanced around, and noticed that he had gone back to his room. He checked the time absently and discovered that it had only been a minute since he had gone to speak with them. He hurriedly got up, went to his closet, and put on his orange jacket, the only bright orange item his parents would allow him to own, over his school shirt and tie. He then hurriedly left his room through the door and descended the stairs into the hallway of the house. When he came down the stairs wearing his jacket, he could see his parents sitting in the living room, chatting. When his mother saw him, she hurried to her feet. She blurted out, "Naruto, are you okay?" before catching sight of his jacket. "Naruto, where are you going at this time of night?" Because his mind was racing, the blonde was unable to look her in the eye when he stopped in front of the family room's entrance. Before she could reply, he hurried to the door and opened and closed it. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I just need some fresh air," he said. He walked steadily out the front gate and down the street, ignoring the lights overhead as he went. A few hours later, Naruto said quietly, "It's a little cool out tonight," as he continued down the same street he had been on earlier that evening. He didn't really care how long he had been out, and he had no idea. To distract himself from the things he had heard and seen, he simply needed to be out doing something. All he needs is a respite from everything. But could anyone really blame him? Even though he preferred to ignore the fact that he had finally lost it in the mindscape when speaking with the others, most of them would have been a sobbing mess on the floor if they had known everything he had learned in the last day. After all, it had all been too much. Telling someone that you don't know as much about yourself as you think would be enough to aggravate most people. If he wanted to be honest, the situation still bothered him. And if it was true, what did it all mean in the end? In the grand scheme of things, it meant very little. Was he bothered by the obvious conclusion that he was adopted? No, because he was already aware of that small detail. Years ago, he had been seated by his parents and informed that he had been adopted. Due to a number of health issues, his parents were unable to conceive, so they decided to adopt him. He was initially upset by the fact, but he eventually came to terms with the fact that he was adopted and that it didn't lessen their love for him. The idea that, in spite of everything he believed to be true, he actually knew very little was what bothered him, and it greatly enraged him. If he was unable to recall anything, then who was he? Was he a cosmic joke of some kind? He chuckled bitterly to himself. He was not a joke. No, it appeared that he was just a man who had terrible luck. However, now that he thought about it, a godly being whose domain involved luck might have cursed him if he had been unlucky. Now that he considered it, with gods being real and all, it would have made some sense back then. The tailed beasts might have been reluctant to tell him the truth because of this. He finally became aware of his surroundings as his breath struck the chilly air and he saw the tiny pieces of frozen condensation escape his mouth. By now, he had most likely explored half the town. He had initially followed a path that led to the park and spent some time strolling around it. He and Issei found their favorite spot and spent some time sitting there and gazing into the dark woods. When he had had enough of that, he started simply strolling through the streets and playing games like rock or kick the can with the ones he occasionally found on the ground. But now he didn't know where he was. After spotting a street sign while searching for one, he discovered that he was roughly 50 minutes on foot from his home and 10 minutes from the market area. There was no doubt that he was somewhat distant from his home. Now that he thought about it, his parents were probably concerned about him. He kind of left his house rather suddenly, and he didn't say much to them on the way out. He took his phone out and checked the time. The time was nearly 11 p.m. Geez, he thought, astonished at the moment. He took a lollipop he had purchased at a corner store out of his pocket, unwrapped it, and hurriedly put it in his mouth. I should probably get home. Mom is probably worried and may send Dad out to look for me. The taste made him sigh. Miso ramen flavored. The things that technology and flavoring machines can do never cease to amaze me anymore. The blonde considered trying to speak with Diedrich, Kurama, and the other tailed beasts once more when he got home as he made his way to the next corner. He should have apologized to them for his behavior when he was attempting to elicit answers from them. Even though they were withholding information from him, he ultimately just lost it and behaved like a brat toward them. After all, it was for his protection. After giving it some thought, he realized that he hadn't eaten anything either. In fact, he hadn't eaten since this morning. He ought to fix that minor issue as soon as he got home. He sort of had to eat something or else his mother would have to tell him that he hadn't eaten anything. He would rather not hear the speech if he could because she had pestered him about it too many times when he was a child. While he was there, he might want to get some ramen. He abruptly stopped and turned his head toward the street on the right after hearing a tingling scream. He said absently. The scream came from that direction, as he glared down the street out of a sense of dread. It had a natural, darker feel to it than his own magic. He dared to admit that the sensation caused his stomach's juices to slightly turn sour. This feeling feels the same as when I fought Donaseek yesterday. I guess this is what it feels like when someone is using magic. When Diedrich said, "You're right when you say that it feels like magic, partner," Naruto became aware of the sudden appearance of a glowing green circle on his hand. As he gazed at the glowing circle, the blonde raised his arm toward his face. However, as you probably already knew, magic isn't human, nor is it like the fallen angels last night. Doesn't it feel more wrong? Yeah, the teenager said, continuing to gaze down the street. It feels unnatural. It's the devil's magic. Diedrich interrupted himself shortly after answering. Allow me to reword that. It's the devil's magic, but it feels more like the old-fashioned devils than the modern ones. Old devils? Did devils come in a variety of forms? If he has ever heard of a first, that is it. Allow me to explain something. Diedrich started out sounding like a student trying to explain something to a teacher. These days, there are two kinds of devils. Sons and daughters who were born pure or those who were reborn as servant devils via the evil peace system. He whispered, evil peace system, searching his pocket for the card Hayate had handed him. When he realized he had left the card on his desk at home and couldn't find it in his pocket, he silently cursed. He started running in the direction he thought the noise was coming from after turning to look back down the street. You mentioned that last night as something that might have been able to revive Issei, right? Yes, I did, but only if a higher-ranking devil deemed them deserving of joining their race for some reason. I learned about this system from an adventure with one of my former partners approximately 200 years ago. It was a system designed to help replenish the devil population that had been lost during the Great War. The blonde asked hurriedly, "Great War," as his feet repeatedly tapped the floor. "What the heck is this Great War thing you're talking about?" "A tale for another time," was the dragon's swift response. "What I'm going to tell you has nothing to do with the Great War. Devils who have been reborn do not have to worry about this, but those who are not subservient to a higher class devil do. Until they are freed from the devil's service, a reborn devil must remain close to their master in order to control their abilities. If they don't, their abilities go crazy and they begin consuming people because it makes them hungry. Given the sense of the person's magic as well, that is most likely what we are dealing with. I'm shocked you could tell for someone who had just become aware of their abilities." "So am I." From what he could see, nothing had appeared yet. That was a fact that was really getting on his nerves. "So, are you certain that you should be running in the direction of the scream's origin?" "Probably not." The dragon asked inquisitively. "Then why are you doing it again? Aren't you supposed to be running the other way? For reference, do I need to remind you again that you only discovered your abilities yesterday? Most new magic users are not stupid enough to pick a fight with something within the first day of using their magic." The blonde yelled back, "Well, in case you forgot, I'm a bit of an oddity already," as a gust of wind blew past him. "Why did it have to be so fucking windy tonight?" The red Welsh asked dryly, as if he already knew the answer. "You're just going to disregard what logic says, aren't you?" Rather than being irritated, he laughed encouragingly. "All right, you made it through last night. When you were the one picking the fight, let's see what you can do. When you battle this beast, I hope to witness the same bravery and audacity that I witnessed last night." However, when the blonde stopped in front of a street light and found a small spot to stare at, any further conversation came to an abrupt halt. "Blood," the teenager said in a low voice. A big splatter of blood was sitting right in the light. If its appearance was any indication, the person who had lost it was also losing a lot of it. He had only seen that quantity once, and that was yesterday, when those light spears had pierced his hands. He searched the area for any more hints. Nothing noteworthy was left behind, as far as he could tell, and there were definitely no indications of struggle anywhere. His mind was racing, trying to come up with a possible course of events. The victim was either taken from behind or caught off guard if there was no struggle. Either that or the devil he was facing was large enough or powerful enough to prevent the victim of their attack from touching the ground, treating them as if they were nothing more than a light object to toss around. If so, where would that be? He discovered something that would enable him to track down both the target and the devil who had attacked it when he heard another scream and turned to look down the street once more. Away from the big blood spot, he had discovered tiny drops of blood. He tracked them down by a trail of blood. The worried teenager started to run, rushing ahead as if flames were grazing his heels. With an urgent, "Diedrich," he thrust his right arm forward. The familiar face of Welsh Dragon's prison clamped down on his arm as green light covered it. "I need a boost." The green gem started to shine as the dragon's voice said, "You got it, partner." The word, "boost," echoed through the atmosphere. The blonde's body felt lighter and surrounded by blue light, which caused his magical reserves to double. His speed increased and he nearly missed the quick left he needed to hang in order to keep following the blood, causing the world to blur a little. He followed the trail for a few minutes before stopping and discovering that the blood trail had finally vanished. He silently cursed his luck and gave himself a frustrated growl. He muttered to himself that it would be more difficult for him to locate them now unless. It appears that he had to apologize sooner rather than later. "Hey guys," Naruto shouted to his inner friends, hoping that they would hear. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I know that I reacted badly to what you said. I was just upset when you told me all of that. So please, I need your help. I need to know if one of you has the ability to track this devil. They took someone and now that person's life is on the line, so if one of you has the ability to track this thing, please help me." The blonde heard a snort in his head after a moment of silence. "You've always got to try and help someone, don't you?" Kurama's voice echoed in his mind. The blonde heard a hint of laughter in his voice, along with another emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Alright, I've got your back, Naruto. It will be just like old times. Reach out and bond with me. We'll track this thing down and kick its ass." As he closed his eyes and sensed a force reaching out to him, Naruto couldn't help but grin at the statement. As he opened his eyes once more, the blonde couldn't help but smirk to himself, a sensation that was almost familiar to him as he and Kurama grew closer. The magic that flowed from him has turned crimson once more, and it perfectly suited his current state of mind. However, just as he was growing accustomed to the sensation, he was struck by something that felt like an unexpected migraine. For one, the fact that his vision was now reddened was a significant development. Everything that had not previously been red had been subtly tinted that way wherever he looked. The fact that he could see tiny black wisps rising out of the ground everywhere he looked was another significant thing that had frightened him. Others were big enough to be seen from a few blocks away, while others were rather small. These items were everywhere. He felt as though he was staring at a world that was entirely different from his own. "Over there, Link," Kurama said. "That's partially correct," and the blonde could hear a hint of smugness in his voice. "It's one of my many amazing one-of-a-kind abilities. When you and I bond, you gain the ability to sense, or see in this case, negative emotions. Do you see those little black wisps?" The brunette grinned. "Those little black wisps you see are a result of people in position of negative emotions passing through. The larger ones you see signify that area is probably where a person with those emotions reside." The blonde said, "They're all over the place, with permission." "Of course they are," said the beast brusquely. "All beings have negative emotions. No one living thing does not have them, and that's why you can see them all over the place. What allows us to differentiate our targets from other people though is the ability to also get a feel of what these negative emotions are. Are they on the less harmful of the scale, or are they the truly evil thoughts about killing or having killed someone? This is what allows us to tell the difference." Shukaku's voice added, "Of course you could also mention that the ability used to be instinctive before. You forgot to tell him the part where in the ability's translation over to magic it became less awesome because now you see the negative emotions instead of just being able to just tell." Kurama yelled back, "Fuck you, Shukaku," giving Naruto a migraine with his loud rumbling. The blonde looked for a place with strong negative emotions, but she ignored them as they carried on their little argument. Diedrich from Naruto's right arm remarked, "I see that Fox gave you a useful ability to use. They're undoubtedly the strangest group of creatures I have ever encountered." The teen with the whiskers said, "Yeah, they kind of are, aren't they?" after he eventually caught a glimpse of a big black plume rising in the distance behind a row of trees. He felt as though a lump had formed and fallen to the pit of his stomach just from staring at it. Whatever lived there was abnormal, and to make matters worse, it was laced with a good deal of evil. If he had to guess, the victim had also been taken there to be eaten by a stray devil. Moving a little faster than the average person would likely notice if they were looking, the blonde sped down the street, blurring his way along. At that moment, he realized that if he kept up his current pace, it would take him some time to reach the forest. He decided to give it a try and decided to jump mid-run to see how high he could go. Using Kurama's and his own skills, he was able to jump nearly as high as a second. Story house. The blonde decided to take a more picturesque route, so he quickly applied the brakes to his run, stopped abruptly in front of a house, and performed a crouching jump. His feet slammed on the tiles as he launched himself onto the roof of the house. The self-described Yakuza boy started running again and made his way to the house's edge before leaping onto the roof above. Before arriving at the forested area, he performed the feat with ease on a few more houses, jumping down from the last house to the forest entrance. As he approached the black plume, he felt a growing sense of dread, which confirmed that he was headed in the right direction. "Well, it seems you decided jumping roofs again would be a good idea," Yuki said with a hint of humor. "I swear it's like it's almost instinctual for you to do it, isn't it?" Kokuo's harsh voice chastised, "Is now really the time for you to be making jokes about things Naruto can't remember? We're walking right into another dangerous situation right after yesterday and you're making jokes? Ah, don't get you tails in a twist hooves," Shukaku said with joy. "The kid is just going to pick a fight. What's the worst that could happen?" "Hooves, really?" the dolphin horse shot back. "I had been led to believe that jokes and nicknames were your specialty, Shukaku. Instead I find something like that one falling rather flat instead. Are you having an off night?" As he ran into the forest and straight toward the spot where he saw the big black plume rising, the blonde felt the impulse to palm his face. He observed the dearth of wildlife in the area while he was running. He would at least see a few squirrels or the odd raccoon dog this far out, but it seemed to him that they had all been virtually exterminated. As if they had simply vanished. It's possible that this stray could have hunted back here for a while in order to keep her existence here a secret, Kurama pondered. In fact, that would most likely make the most sense in this case, concurred the dragon inside the gauntlet. Unfortunately, I have no idea which devil family is in control of this area, but it makes no difference. What little I do know is that, regardless of the family, they are typically not very forgiving of strays. It would definitely be more effective for the stray to try to hide itself. The blonde continued the conversation, "My question is why hide in this area?" as he reached the end of the designated path and arrived at the origin of the significant cloud of malevolent intent he had sensed. The four-story home that the stray had reportedly held itself up in had an outdated appearance. With all of the broken and cracked windows on the upper floors, it appeared dilapidated and as though no one had lived there for years. Old trees that had fallen close to them were all broken down, and the front area was in a similar state of ruin. The fox added that perhaps as the question of the century to the discussion, you would think they would be able to feed better in the city. More people, killings and disappearances not completely uncommon. Is this devil stupid or something for coming here? It makes no difference what the case is. In the end, all that matters is that there is a stray here. Are you certain you still wish to continue with this partner? Instead of responding, the blonde chose to gaze at a bloody handprint that had been left on the mansion's left double door. The bloody print trailed off to the door's edge, going inward, and he could tell the person who had been taken had attempted to grab the door with his hand. He could practically picture what the devil was doing to the person. Different scenarios kept repeating in his head like a clockwork pattern, but they always came back to him in the back of his mind. Can you save this one? He had been thinking about it almost non-stop ever since he heard the scream. The thought was constantly on his mind, weighing him down. All that had happened yesterday was that Issei had died and he had survived. A piece of him had died, regardless of how much time he had to come to terms with the fact that he had never felt like he had left that church entirely yesterday. Perhaps it was the bond he had always shared with his friend. Even though he wasn't sure, the question still stood. Could he truly help this person, or would it just be another instance of his failure, similar to what happened with Issei? He went to the front door, clenching his metal-covered fist. Then he took a step that he never would have taken in his life. He kicked both sides of the double door off its hinges with a thrust of his leg. The doors crashed into the concrete wall after flying to the back of the room. The blonde surveyed the room instead of being astounded by his own strength at that particular moment. It resembled a room from an old horror film that he had occasionally seen from America. As far as the eye could see, there were wooden floors and drab, old walls that appeared to have been damaged by water. In addition, the blonde was unable to see the ceiling because it was obscured by the pitch blackness, which gave him a suspicious feeling. The room was lined with 6 elaborate-looking pillars, 3 on each side and equally spaced. The floor of the room was covered in broken picture frames, and the 1 or 2 paintings that were there were crooked. The only thing keeping the room from being totally dark was the moonlight coming through 2 old windows in the back. There were no other significant light sources in the space. The stray was visible to him, the origin of all the evil he had witnessed. Yuki started to say, "Now Naruto, we have to be careful with how we do this," but the blonde interrupted. Naruto yelled, "Hey you fucking stray," at the creature he had just spotted hiding in the corner's darkness. "Give me back that guy you took right now." Son Goku laughed and said, "Or we could throw any pretenses of subtlety out the window because fuck subtlety." But as he watched something move slightly in the back and then hurl something at him, the blonde chose to ignore that. The desecrated top half of a corpse fell exactly where he had been standing, forcing him to duck to the right. The body belonged to a younger man, most likely in his 20s, and his face was permanently set in agony. Chunks of flesh were missing from the arm and chest regions, and whatever clothing he had on had been stripped off. Fortunately for the blonde, he hadn't eaten since breakfast in case he puked at the sight of it. He was able to keep the bile from his unfed stomach from rising to the surface and exiting his throat. This was simply unhealthy. The person was nearly unrecognizable, and it was totally mangled. He then became aware of another factor that had exacerbated the emotion. "You failed again." He wanted to scream as the words kept repeating in his mind. There was another dead person. He failed to save yet another person. Perhaps he would still be alive if he hadn't taken so long. Perhaps. The blonde's already red eyes turned to the corner where he knew the devil was hiding when a seductive feminine voice said, "Oh I'm sorry," echoing through the room. "Were you looking for me to give you all of him? I'm sorry dear, but you're going to have to wait a few weeks to get the rest of him back. Though if you want I could show you where the rest of him is. I'll even give you the privilege of joining him if you'd like." The blonde snarled as he watched the shadow-covered lower half of the creature slowly emerge from behind the pillar. He might have remarked on the blonde's attractive upper half if he hadn't been so furious. Her large pert breasts and toned flesh were covered in pale creamy skin. With her long, flowing black hair down her back and her gray eyes, her slender face would appear magnificent to the average person. She had a smile on her face that somehow managed to be both seductive and almost insane. But the teenager didn't give a damn about her appearance. Even on the inside, she remained an ugly bitch to him. Unable to adequately convey his feelings, the blonde snarled, "You think this is funny," pointing to the corpse on the ground beside him. "You just killed an innocent person and you're cracking jokes?" She dismissively waved her well-groomed hand and gave a small scowl. "Please, I wouldn't call him innocent," she reprimanded. "After I picked him up, the young man kept trying to pray for help from some being above and promised he would never cheat on his girlfriend again if he was allowed to live. Personally, I think both myself and the young woman should be satisfied that this person is no longer among us. She no longer has a boyfriend who cheats on her and me." She smiled broadly at this point. Well, I get a free meal out of it. If you ask me, it's a win-win for both of us. The blonde's only reaction was to growl. Diedrich, I'm going to need some more juice, he interrupted. The word, boost, echoed throughout the building and his gauntlet glowed instead of reacting, enabling the blonde to feel his magic level soar and cover his form once more. He was going to fight even though he knew it would be difficult. She claimed that the man was a scumbag, but that didn't mean he had to perish. Oh, I see, crooned the devil woman. She pushed her hands through 2 magic circles that materialized in the air before drawing out 2 long yellow spears. You're going to try and fight me, aren't you? I have to say, though, you have an enormous reserve of magic for a human. I wonder how it and you will taste. Since you are my next meal, allow me to introduce myself as the chef who will be filleting you. My name is Visor and I am a stray devil formerly in service of House Visago. May I know the name of the one who is about to become my next dish? Go fuck yourself, the blonde replied elegantly. Her body lurched forward as she started to bum rush him spears first. Humph, a little bit of exercise before a meal can be nice too, she said in full. When a spear attempted to stab him, Naruto rolled out of the way and pushed off the ground. At that moment, Naruto was able to see the entirety of her body, and he had to admit that he was relieved that he had not fallen for any of her tricks. The woman's lower body resembled that of some sort of mutant centaur. Her massive body was supported by 4 brown, savage-looking legs, each of which had sharp claws. To complete the package's strange appearance, Visor added a scaly tail that resembled a snake. When combined with her upper half, it appeared as though someone had cut her with a chainsaw and then stitched her back together using whatever was closest to them. In a sudden burst of speed, he rushed beneath her body after dodging another spear strike rather than making a remark about her appearance. The blonde leapt up and used his fist to deliver a right uppercut, which managed to send the monstrous-looking devil flying a little. She struck him with her clawed paw while in the air, smashing him into the wall and creating cracks behind Naruto as a result. She hurled one of her long spears at Visor as soon as he hit the ground. His eyes grew wide as he pushed himself away from the law, barely avoiding the spear that had become lodged in it. The other one was flung where he had been standing, and he dodged once more. With a roar, Visor charged him once more, lifting her left paw and slamming it down hard on him. The blonde saw this as his opportunity and remained firm, crouching with his hands raised and ready for the blow. When her paw eventually caught in his grasp, the blonde pushed it up, ignoring the sudden strain on his muscles. This knocked her off balance and caused her to fall, with her upper body resting on its side. The blonde quickly moved behind her, putting his hands around her silky tail and holding on tight, causing his opponent to groan in agony. Although he initially gained traction, he was not able to raise her off the ground. With pride, Son Goku exclaimed, "Then switch out Kurama's bond with mine. I think I've got just the thing that can help us out." "If you think so," the blonde said, a little stumbling in her response. "Kurama, tag out." The fox said, "Humph, got it," as Naruto felt their bond dissolve suddenly and felt his power rise as a result, making it difficult to hold onto his now struggling tail. He felt a new bond cling to him instead of speaking, even though the faint red haze had also disappeared from his vision. He felt a great sense of strength and pride in this connection. Abruptly, he noticed a slight increase in muscle mass and found it easier to pull on the tail. The person who shared the name with the legendary monkey sage said, "Each tailed beast has something they're better at than all the others outside the magic skills we provide." The blonde started to slowly rotate while he spoke, using his strength to drag a struggling Visor along the floor. While Kurama is definitely strong in every major area, he is not the best. I, for example, have immense physical strength, and when combined with your already boosted strength, well, I'm pretty sure you can figure that out. The blonde gave a nod and accelerated her spin, eventually gaining enough momentum to lift the stray off the ground. When the blonde finally let go, she crashed straight through one of the building's back walls, the rubbing flying out of her way as she caught herself in midair and landed with her paws scraping the floor. Naruto chased after her and leapt through the gap in the wall, hurrying past Visor and avoiding to the left before delivering a powerful haymaker to the side of her body, which caused her to skid across the floor. He leapt into the air and prepared to strike her once more, but she struck him from the side by her tail, sending him hurtling back toward the tree line. The blonde grabbed a big tree branch and swung himself to the ground, using Son Goku's strength and reflexes. He saw Visor's spears fly from inside the building into her open palms as his legs struck the soft patch of grass, and she gave him a snarky smile. However, instead of throwing them at him again, she opted to try something different. She stuck her spears in the ground and brought her hands to her breasts while beginning to massage them, much to the blonde's shock at the blatant display of public self-fondling. Before he could say anything, however, red circles began to spin around her breasts as her nipples hardened. A light green, putrid-looking liquid spewed from her chest toward him. The teen ducked to the side as it flew past him. Naruto heard a few cracks and looking back saw that whatever she had shot out of her breasts was acidic because half of the trunk was melted and now falling toward him. Bracing himself again, he threw his hands up and caught trunk, unconsciously surprising himself even with his ability to do so, and gave it a boost forward, sending it in Visor's direction as a distraction. Visor merely knocked the tree out with one of her front paws before lunging at him, spears in hand. After crouching and leaping over Visor onto the monstrous back of her body, the blonde slammed his right foot into her back, knocking her to the ground. She stabbed him with one of the spears after twisting the top half of her body slightly, but Naruto spun around it and reached her face, hitting her jaw repeatedly. Only when something slimy wrapped around his waist and threw him backward into another tree did he stop. As Visor turned to face Naruto and used her left hand to massage her now bruised jaw, Naruto pulled himself down from the tree. "You little bastard," she yelled, her mouth twisted in rage. He saw that her eyes narrowed into slits filled with anger and that her teeth started to become sharp. "You think that just because your eyes and magic change color that you can beat me? Newsflash for you, brat. You're dead." She rushed toward him once again full force, making the blonde wonder if she had learned that rushing him was not a good plan. He ran to meet her halfway, this time avoiding another set of spear strikes and sliding under her overly large body to get behind her. He avoided a strike from her tail and delivered a bone-breaking kick to the back of her back left leg. A loud crack and even louder cry of pain echoing through the area. He heard it snap under pressure as the blonde pushed his leg deeper into the back of her leg. Visor fell forward to the ground without the functionality of her leg, moaning in pain. While Visor licked her wounds, however, Naruto continued his assault, jumping onto her beast-like back and rushing toward the top of her body. Before she had a chance to turn around, Naruto grabbed her body and pulled on her left arm from behind. He then drove his knee into her arm, breaking it and sending her spear to the ground. As the stray screamed in rage, Visor's tail once again made its presence known and pushed him away before he could do the other arm.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.